We have some bad injury news. We have some good injury news. Obviously, we'll dive into everything. We'll update the rankings on the site, and then we will get into all your fantasy football questions. So first thing is Baker Mayfield does not practice on Wednesday. Now, I personally am still expecting that Baker is good to go. I mean, I would be very surprised if you were to miss, if you go through and look at quarterbacks missing practices on Wednesday. It's a common occurrence. Lamar didn't practice last Wednesday, didn't practice last Thursday. Obviously, this will be something to continue to monitor, however. But if you look at the sports books, they're pricing in that Baker Mayfield should play this weekend. Sterling Shepard doesn't practice, and neither Evans or McMillan practice. I would be very surprised if Evans plays this week. I'd imagine that Evans is going to miss. Then obviously you have the week 11 bye. Evans is presumably back in week 12. McMillan, I just simply don't know at this point. If McMillan looks like he's not playing this week, I would probably go ahead and cut him just because if you realistically think through it, if he's not playing this week, you're not going to see anything then. You're not going to see anything in week 11. And by the time it gets week 12, cool, McMillan will be healthy, but possibly so will Evans. Jordan Mason fully practiced on Wednesday. So obviously we've been told a lot that McCaffrey will be back, but now that Mason gets in a full practice, Isaac Gindo is a very clear drop. Like I had Gindo in the flock league. I was just waiting to see if we got a confirming report on either 49er. And yeah, I think we just dropped Gindo for, I believe, Gabe Davis in the flock league. Gus Edwards says he feels 100%. Gus Edwards off the IR and gets in a limited practice. Does this mean you should rush out there and go pick up Gus Edwards? Probably not. Does this mean that you should lower down your rankings with J.K. Dobbins dramatically? Probably not. Does this mean Dobbins probably falls 3 to 4 slots in the rankings? Yeah. Like going through and looking at the rest of season rankings, J.K. Dobbins, where did we have this, dude? I would probably rather have Swift and Connor over Dobbins if Edwards is coming back in, knowing that Edwards may have some usage here. Now, obviously, it's not a massive concern. Devonta Smith doesn't practice on Wednesday. For the love of God, please play. I need you this week, buddy. I have a very important game here. If Smith misses, you have good news that Goddard is potentially back. So if Smith misses and Goddard's back, Goddard's probably a must-start player. A.J. Brown gets in a limited practice, so sounds like A.J. Brown's going to be good to go. Gabe Davis gets in a limited practice. I'm kind of assuming Davis plays this week. Dameon Pierce doesn't practice, doesn't matter. Jamal Williams doesn't matter. Now, Chris Olave will visit specialist, no decision on IR yet. So for me, with Olave not hitting the IR already, my base assumption, and of course I'm an idiot, I could be wrong here, is that Olave's missing weeks 10 and 11. You have the bye week in week 12, and Olave potentially is back around week 13, week 14. Now, of course, I could be wrong. You could also possibly have him missing weeks 13 and 14 if he goes on the IR right now. Now, still, if you're a playoff team, I don't mind going after Olave, but obviously you would need that discount. We dramatically moved Olave down the rest of season rankings the second that you had the concussion, where now we have Olave down here as like a wide receiver 3. So obviously lower expectations with Olave. Okay. Now going through, Goddard says he's tracking to play week 10, which is great news. He was at practice today and he has missed 3 weeks. This would have been the 4th one. And remember, he didn't go on the IR. So I'd assume that Goddard's back. Tyjae Spears gets in a limited practice. Spears has been practicing for a bit here. I would assume that Spears is trending towards playing. And obviously, there's no hope in Spears being the starting running back here by any means. That ship has sailed. But if Spears does make it in, very similar to what you have with Dobbins seeing Gus Edwards get added back, it's not going to make like a massive difference, but it will take a few touches away from Pollard, maybe as a receiver here as well. In a garbage offense, I think Pollard would slide down rankings just a bit. Drake London practices. Great news. Obviously, it doesn't mean he's guaranteed to play this weekend, but at the very most, I think London would miss 1 week. Darius Slayton doesn't practice. Don't care about Keaton Mitchell. Isaiah Likely listed out for Thursday with the hamstring. So to be honest with you, what I probably need to do is, for our weekly rankings, I probably need to go ahead and move Mark Andrews up over there at tight ends. Previously, we had Andrews behind Komet. Oh, we actually need to update these dramatically. We had the video coming out tomorrow, but Gesicki is like a must-start tight end this week for sure. I'd for sure start Gesicki over Laporta. But anyway, I think at this point, we would probably go ahead and move Andrews up ahead of Cole Kmet as well. Obviously, we're going to get likely at the very bottom with likely being ruled out. Going through McCaffrey, Debo, Jennings, all get in a limited practice. I am expecting every single one of these players to be good to go. And also with Jordan Mason getting in a practice, again, you can cut Isaac Gindo. And I think Jennings is a sneaky flex play. I think CMC and Debo Samuel are must-start guys immediately the second that they get back. Caleb Williams not listed on the injury report. He's good to go. Justin Fields gets into full practice. Yeah, T. Higgins isn't playing. All right, T. Higgins hasn't practiced at all. Don't plan on starting T. Higgins. Let's see. Jonathan Brooks will be activated to the 53-man roster. A massive news here regarding the running backs that you have in Carolina. I mean, going through and looking at the rest of season ranks, I know a lot of people are annoyed with us having Jonathan Brooks ahead of Chuba Hubbard. Now, of course, this is rest of season. For the love of God, do not start Jonathan Brooks this week. Chuba Hubbard's the guy in the short term. But realistically speaking, if we are making rest of season rankings here, while Hubbard has been good, for me personally, I want to be betting on the guy that they just invested round 2 NFL draft capital in. That was a great prospect, that has the size, that has the athleticism and the receiving skill set. So Hubbard's been phenomenal. Now, of course, the reality of the situation is it's a garbage offense. It's probably a committee. Neither guy is probably really exciting, which is why we have both lower. But I would see more upside rest of season with Jonathan Brooks. Bryce Young's going to start week 10, so garbage offense again, like we were saying. Adam Thielen doesn't practice, so maybe you can start Leggett if you really wanted to. Let's see. CeeDee Lamb does not practice, so this was kind of expected, but still at the same time, very real possibility Lamb does not play this week. So let's go through and see. Nico Collins passed all tests for the hamstring injury, still to be determined if he plays week 10. From what I read, I don't think Nico Collins actually practiced today. Can y'all please spam the chats? Do y'all think Nico Collins plays this week? Just simple yes or no. For me, selfishly, I really want Nico Collins to come back next week. I have to play Danny this week in the Flock League. Obviously, I would rather not play against Nico. We got no, yes, no, 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 yes, no. No, he didn't practice, so nope. No, 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 yes, yes, yes. So for me, I think him not practicing on Wednesdays, not like the end all be all. Again, of course, if he doesn't practice on Thursday, that'll be a much larger issue in my mind. But so let's go. Brian Robinson Jr. practices Wednesday. Keon Coleman does not. Amari Cooper does. And I think that's about it for all the practice reports that we have to date. So I think those are the updated ranks. Obviously, we have a bunch of questions to get to. We have a bunch of teams to look at, trades to look at, starting lineups to submit. Of course, I do want to reiterate that if you ever wanted to go out there and ask a question in any of these live streams, you could always go over to flockfantasy.com, hit the little button in the top right corner that says expert advice. From there, you can send in a team review, trade question, start sit question, super message, whatever you are wanting. I would highly recommend, if you wanted to send in a team review, to take advantage of the offer that we have over there on Underdog Fantasy, where if you go over to Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK, you're going to be getting a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, at the same time, you'll be getting a free team review in the live stream we're doing every single night. And you can actually submit that free team review legitimately whenever you want. It doesn't have to be when we're live streaming, because when we go through and answer your question for you, it actually gets sent directly through the site to the exact time that we answered it on the live stream. So you don't even have to be in the live stream when you ask any questions. And also, if you use promo code FLOCK on Underdog, you're going to be getting a free Lamar Jackson pick for tomorrow night's game as well. So make sure that you take advantage of that. I'll leave the link to Underdog Fantasy in the live chats, the description, and the comment section. But let's move this over to some of the questions that we have here. First question is going to be coming up from B. Cosme, always out here, says, my counter offer 4 and 5 team is linked. Appreciate you, as always, sticking with us, my friend. Going from Kupp to Bijan, for me, I think it's a clear upgrade. Obviously, Kupp's been dominant over the past 2 weeks, but I think Puka comes in and the target share for Kupp comes down a bit. Going from Chase Brown to Cedric Tillman is a massive downgrade in my mind, even if you're in a spot in which you have I don't know, Jameis under center. Even if you have Khalil Herbert going over to Cincinnati, for me personally, I would still expect Chase Brown to be the feature back. I would still expect Chase Brown to have the vast majority of work here. So honestly, with this, I probably prefer the Chase Brown and Cooper Kupp side. I mean, it doesn't really matter too much exactly who's on the team, just because this is a running back wide receiver for a running back wide receiver. Like, I know they trade for Khalil Herbert, but I think a big thing with the Khalil Herbert trade isn't necessarily that they don't trust Chase Brown. I think it's more so that the depth is just extremely limited what you had beyond Chase Brown and Zach Moss. So when Moss goes down, they just need to add in another running back as they would pretty much any other position. Now, Jason coming out with our next question says, want to trade for T, Waddle, and Pittman are bad. Going from Rachaad White to Eckler, clear downgrade. Eckler's barely worth the roster spot when Brian Robinson is healthy. Going through and looking at what we have with the pivot from Waddle to Higgins, I would definitely prefer Higgins. If you are a contending roster where you just simply don't need the Rachaad White depth, sure, you can make this move. But obviously, in the short term, it's 100% a loss. The only reason you'd be doing this is in the long term, you think that Higgins will be good to go, and you don't think you can start Waddle. And you have no use for Rachaad White. Jordan, always happy to see you. Here at running back, it freaking sucks, but you actually, no, never. Yeah, Jacobs is on bye, so you freaking have to start Javonte Williams. I mean, obviously, we're not excited about it. We've talked about this offense regressing, and it's a horrible matchup that you have here going up against a really good Kansas City Chiefs defense. Going over to wide receiver, we have Harrison, Pickens, Downs, and Ladd McConkey to choose from. We're definitely going to be going with 2 of these receivers. Obviously, we're going to be taking one receiver here and then one wide receiver down in the flex. If you are looking at my wide receiver rankings at the moment, I have them ranked at 21, 22, and 23. So I personally have them ranked back to back to back. I think we're going to go Pickens, and then for your flex spot, Harrison, Downs will truly just be up to you. To be honest with you, if it was my team, I'd probably go ahead. I'd probably take Harrison. But Downs with Flacco under center has been way, way more consistent than Harrison has, of course. So I think probably the correct call is Downs. Now, Jordan coming out with another question. This is Stroud versus Tua at quarterback. If Nico Collins plays, we're going to go Stroud in an environment against Detroit in which we would assume that you probably have to go through and throw the ball, and that obviously you can't really run it against this Detroit Lions defense. And also the Lions offense is going to put points up on the board. Now, if Nico doesn't play, then very similar to what we said last week, then you have to bench Stroud. You'd pivot over to Tua. Now, going over to wide receiver, Higgins won't be playing this week, so I think Ladd is kind of the easy play there. And then down in the flex, I'm going to be going with Jawan Jennings. Now, of course, if Higgins is good to go, we could pivot off of Ladd, go Higgins, and then move Ladd down to the flex spot. But expectation is that you have no Higgins. Now, Quinn says, hey, Mason, stuck on who to start at tight end, quarterback, and flex this week. Quarterback, Goff, Stafford are very comparable for me. I mean, right now I'm sitting with both of them at QB 12 and QB 13. If you're looking at the implied team total for both offenses, they're both sitting at about 26.5. Neither quarterback's going to have any rushing upside whatsoever. I think I'd probably just go ahead and take Jared Goff, where we've had the larger sample this season. But Stafford's been much better since you obviously had the weapons coming back into this offense, as you would expect. Going down to tight end, we're for sure going to take Kyle Pitts over Laporta. Laporta has one game, I believe, with 5 or more receptions. And then going down to what we are looking at with the flex, for me, it's going to be Chase Brown. So when it's Brown, obviously we want to put him in there at running back and throw McCaffrey in there in the flex, just in case anything happens later this week that we are not expecting. Because Brown obviously does play on Thursday. And speaking of which, it is actually just a very good game that we get tomorrow night. I'm actually excited to watch it. Nate93 says, start Mahomes rest of season ? Other options are May, Herbert, and Bo Nix. Yeah, I would go ahead. I would start Mahomes over these options. For me, I think Mahomes is kind of in the realm of streaming quarterbacks that you are playing week to week based off matchups, but probably in the tier above the guys that you listed out. Like, I'd be viewing him more so in like the Goff, Stafford, Tua range. And then down there in the flex, absolutely love both Chase Brown and Deebo Samuel. Probably end up just having to go Chase Brown in what should be the highest scoring game in the NFL this week, where even if Khalil Herbert is active, expectations are that Herbert's role is going to be absolutely tiny, and that this is a Thursday game where Herbert was just added to the team here. So I think we would go ahead and we would take Chase Brown. Now, next question coming out from Will. Ooh, that was not intended. Coming out says, should we ask for more with Breece for... No. Do not get greedy here. Terry McLaurin's been great. If you're looking at total fantasy points so far this season, he has been a top 10 wide receiver. But Breece at the same time, while yes, he's coming off a disappointing game, this is still a running back in which we have had the 3-down usage. You've had usage as a receiver, and really very little hesitation to go through and call Breece Hall a must-start running back one option every single week. And frankly, it's just more difficult to find that running back production than it is going to be at wide receiver. Like, I would say 90% of the time, if somebody goes through and they send you an offer, yeah, even if you like it, it can't hurt to try to squeeze a little bit more value out of them and ask for just a small little upgrade elsewhere. But this is one of those deals where you can't get greedy. If this is sitting in your inbox, you just 100% take it right this second. Now, Legend coming out with a start-sit question. Here at quarterback, obviously Lamar is in his own tier. Going down to wide receiver, Breece locked. Actually, no, never mind. We have Kamara. Dear God, this is a monstrous team. Yeah, I have to start Kamara. Wide receiver, sounds like A.J. Brown's going to be good to go. We're going to go A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill. I know Tyreek's been worse. This is an insane team. Is this really a 10-team league? And then going down to what we have in the flex spot, I think most weeks in the future, we are going to be putting McCaffrey in here. However, specifically this week, for your roster in particular, you have the luxury where you can bench McCaffrey and you can wait to see what happens. Where specifically this week, you are able to go through, you're able to instead play Breece Hall. Of course, 99.99% of teams that are watching this that have McCaffrey, they're not in the same situation as you. Where I'd recommend them, don't wait with McCaffrey, just play him immediately. But if you were to play McCaffrey immediately, that would mean you're benching Breece. So, insane team. If that's actually a 10-team league, unbelievable. Matt says, I'm 7-2 and they're 2-5. Well, I don't see how they're 2-5, my friend. But anyway. Trading Pollard to Pacheco, obviously downgrade in the short term, potentially upgrade in the long term, dependent on the timeline that you have with Pacheco here. And then going from Flowers to Evans, downgrade in the short term, for sure an upgrade in the long term with the Godwin injury. So for me, I think if you are 7-2, it does make, this is the perfect example of like a win-win deal. Where if the other team needs to win right this second, if they ask me this, I would 100% tell them, hey, you have no other option. You need to go get Flowers and Pollard. You can't sit around with these injured guys on your roster any longer. However, of course, with you on the other hand, it's a perfect example of, oh no, we're just thinking about the fantasy football playoffs. You can't afford to go out there and make that move. So 100% I would look to do this, my friend. Now, Caden coming out with one of those free Underdog team reviews. Appreciate you. Going to be excited to check this out, my guy. Here, team name is Brown Rice. We are currently sitting 5th in the league analyzer. Looking at the quarterback room, obviously we have Lamar, an elite quarterback that you can start every single week, effectively in his own tier. Nobody comes remotely close. Now, of course, with that being said, when we have Jordan Love here, this Love typically is a quarterback that you do have a considerable amount of value with, where if you could go through and if you could look to sell him in a 2-for-1 deal with somebody else to go get an upgrade, that would be preferable. Now, the issue is it's a 10-team league, right? So we can go through and we can look at some of these teams that maybe need help at quarterback. The team at the very bottom, I mean, they have Russ and Rodgers. The issue is, dear God, the rest of their team is garbage. But I mean, if you could presumably go out there and send them Jordan Love, where it would give them a clear upgrade at quarterback, and go and get an upgrade at running back ourselves, obviously McCaffrey would be the guy that I would prefer. Like if you could send Love and maybe Chase Brown, I'd prefer Love and Tyrone Tracy, but I just think it's going to be much harder to do. But if you could make that 2-for-1 deal and go pivot over to McCaffrey, absolute no-brainer. Or maybe even Jordan Love and like Kareem Hunt, or Jordan Love and Isaiah Pacheco to go get Tyrone Tracy, I would love to make a move like that. But it's just much easier said than done, specifically in a 10-team league. And to be honest with you, if you can't go get a deal done with Jordan Love, you would cut him with the options you have on the waiver wire. Going over to running back, we have Chase Brown, Tyrone Tracy, Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, Chuba Hubbard. So obviously, we've been pretty strong at running back so far. Some of the running backs that we have relied on, probably not going to be as exciting going into the future with Chuba Hubbard as well as Kareem Hunt, but presumably we can get the upside of somebody like Isaiah Pacheco later on. Going over to wide receiver, we have A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel. So 2 wide receiver ones in my mind. We have Higgins with a long-term upside. We have Darnell Mooney as someone who can play right now. It's a 2 wide receiver 1 flex league. So like these guys at the bottom end that are serviceable, but maybe don't give you the elite level ceiling. They're guys that I think would be kind of clear sells, not even sells, just freaking drop them off the roster. Like looking at someone like Cedric Tillman, if you have Mike Evans on your waiver wire, there is no reason for you to ever roster a player like Tillman instead of him. You drop Cedric Tillman, you go pick up Mike Evans. That would immediately make this team significantly better. And the other move to make, like we already discussed, is us going through and us trying to move off of Jordan Love. And if you can't sell Love in that 2-for-1 deal to go get an upgrade elsewhere, then at that point you could even consider maybe cutting Love to go pick up Jonathan Brooks, if we are just trying to think about how this team could actually move the needle for itself. Also, a player that may be hard to sell this week, but if he gets another spike, Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts could be a very clear sell for us when we have the elite tight end in Travis Kelce already through his bye week as well. But yeah, I mean, the clear play here is let's go send Jordan Love with the running back depth piece. Go get an upgrade at running back. Open up a roster spot that way. You go immediately pick up Mike Evans. And then honestly, at that point, with how strong your wide receiver position is, and the fact that it's a 2 wide receiver 1 flex league, I think you could consider dropping Tillman and instead picking up Jonathan Brooks. So that's what I would be looking to do here, my guy. But again, really appreciate you. Really hope I was able to help you out in some way. And thank you so much for taking advantage of that free team review offer, of course. Now, looking at another question from C. McCoy. Always out here supporting the channel. Happy to see you. Let me hook you up with a free start sit question here. Says, I have a must-win matchup this week, and I'm torn on starting Mahomes or Goff. I picked up Gesicki to possibly flex over Hunt since Higgins is out. So here, Mahomes, Goff, not a super easy call. Obviously, Mahomes gives you a little more rushing upside than what you're going to get with Goff. If you're looking at how these offenses project out this week, right now you have about a 25-point implied team total for the Chiefs. You have about a 26.5-point implied team total for the Lions. So the Lions offense projects to be a higher scoring offense, not by a massive difference, but also we would expect that you do have the Lions probably is the more effective team when it comes to just straight up rushing the ball. So if you're looking at my quarterback rankings this week, we have Mahomes and Goff 2 spots away from each other. If it's a 4-point passing touchdown format where the rushing upside does matter a little bit more, there I probably go ahead and take Mahomes, but it's not an easy call to make. Now go down to the flex spot. Here I think it is relatively easily Kareem Hunt, and that we can just monopolize the points that we should be expecting in in Kansas City. Obviously, it's a tougher matchup if you're looking at what you have for the Chiefs here going up against Denver this week. But still, I mean, realistically speaking, the other option you'd be going with, I don't even know who you could presumably go with. Yeah, we for sure go with Hunt. And then the players that we have actually at running back, wide receiver, and tight end are just freaking insane. I mean, as a side note, if we could sell Hawkinson with like Mahomes and pivot over to a true elite quarterback, that'd make a lot of sense. And then we did hook you up with that free start sit question. So next time, if you send in a question, it should be on the house, my guy. Now, Chief Reefer coming out, long-time member of the flock. Always happy to see you. Here at the flex, we're choosing between Ladd and Downs. For me, I'm probably going to go ahead and say that Downs has the more consistent target volume in his respective offense. We're obviously Ladd, we've seen some pretty high ceilings, but Ladd, you're consistently just getting 6, 7 targets. Where Downs, in the games in which you've had Flacco, you've had a lot of 9, you've had a lot of 10 target performances. Both wide receivers have cemented themselves as the top options in their respective offenses. Now, obviously, this is under the assumption that Nico Collins were to miss. I'm pretty sure it goes without being said that if Nico Collins does play, he is the must-start option. But honestly, I think you could also afford to potentially go through and look to sell a wide receiver and go get a running back upgrade over Dowdle. Okay. Now, let's move this over to our next question. This one's coming out from Raphael. Appreciate you, my guy. Really do want to help you out the best way that I can. So I'm going to hook you up with both a free trade question and a free start set question, just in case there's anything additional that you want to send me about this team. Saying, fantasy rookie here, do we have a chance for the playoffs? Appreciate everything you do for the community. Keep it up. No, thank you so much, my guy. Really appreciate you and going to be excited to check out the squad. We are currently sitting 5th in the league analyzer. It's a very even league where it seems like probably everybody knows what they're doing and they are invested into it. The league settings have this as a format where it's a 12-teamer, so the options on the waiver wire aren't going to be phenomenal. I mean, seeing the options off waivers, I'm actually a little surprised. I don't want to act like I'm too surprised to see Xavier Worthy. I definitely think Worthy could be an interesting pickup here depending on the construction of this team. So going through and looking at what we have at quarterback, we have Kyler and May. May has shown some rushing upside, so I think that May is definitely a really strong streaming option. Now, of course, with that being said, are we ever starting May over Kyler? For me, probably not. Looking at what we have with the available quarterbacks off the waiver wire, this cements it that we probably don't want to cut May. What I was going to tell you is, you know what? Let's cut May. Let's pick up Xavier Worthy off waivers. And then we can go through and we can reevaluate what quarterback we want to stream in week 11 with the Kyler bye based off the matchups at that point. But no, looking at the quarterbacks that are available on your waiver wire, there aren't that many. So I think holding on to May does make sense here. Now, going over to what you have at running back. Running back, we only have 3 options. And our running back 2 here with Javonte Williams, in my mind, isn't an exciting second option. If you have Javonte as your RB3 in a 12-team league, sure, you can get by with it. But I think it's an offense that is slated to see a lot of regression. And at the same time, I think that it's an offense that you should expect estimate to have a slightly larger role based off what this coaching staff saying. So if Javonte kind of turns into a pseudo committee back in a spot in which it's a bad offense, definitely not excited to start him. So if we were wanting to go through and upgrade anything here, it presumably would be running back. Going over to wide receiver, we have the elite guy at the top with Jefferson. We have JSN, Ladd McConkey, Downs, Tillman, all behind him. So plenty of wide receiver depth, right? I do think that it's a natural spot in which if you could potentially go through and make a 2-for-1 deal to upgrade at wide receiver and just consolidate this position, that would make sense, but it is a lot easier said than done. The number one thing that you have to do in my mind here with this team is we need to go ahead and we need to let go of these bottom end tight ends. Looking at Isaiah Likely, I think you can immediately cut Likely right this second. I do personally need to move up Mike Gesicki in our rest of season rankings. I keep on saying, oh, okay, well, when Higgins comes back, Gesicki's not going to be viable. Well, Higgins, God knows when he does come back. So let's make sure we move Gesicki up a bit. And looking at this, the players that you have available on the waiver wire, both at running back and wide receiver, for me, I think the range of outcomes just makes them so much more exciting than what we have at tight ends. We've come to the point of the year that Cade Otton's going to be a must-start player regardless of if you get Evans back after the bye or not, which we'd expect Evans to come back week 12. And then at that point, we probably lower expectations with Cade Otton. But still, you have no Godwin in this offense. It's still a very high volume passing attack. So there's no world in which you're ever starting a tight end here outside of the bye week that you have in Tampa, which is week 11. So next week. So at the very minimum, what we need to do is we need to cut Mike Gesicki. We need to go pick up either Xavier Worthy, Jawan Jennings, or Jalen Warren. I wouldn't want to pick up Dobbs. Nothing's really going to change with this situation this week with him on bye. Then for the bye week next week, we can presumably play Mike Gesicki. Again, you may have no Higgins still. And on top of this, obviously, Eric All did tear the ACL. And then going out of the Kyler bye, I think if May disappoints over the next 2 weeks, I'd probably cut May and only roster one quarterback. And coming out of the Cade Otton bye, I'd probably cut Gesicki and only roster one tight ends and prioritize some of these running backs down here off the waiver wire that could presumably give you the high ceiling if their situation were to change for the better. Where if you were to go pick up somebody like Jalen Warren and then all of a sudden Najee Harris goes down, then Jalen Warren is an absolute must-start running back with your roster. So in terms of trades, I don't particularly see much that we can do or that I'd really want to do. really the main thing would be that we want to be optimizing the bottom end of the roster with as many high upside running backs and wide receivers that we can. So for right this second, you cut Isaiah Likely, you pick up Xavier Worthy, you pick up Jalen Warren or Jawan Jennings, whoever your favorite option is. After the week 11 buys for both Cade Otton and Kyler Murray, you reevaluate Gesicki and you reevaluate Drake May. You potentially cut them both and go pick up additional running backs and wide receivers off the waiver wire. So I think that's what I would be looking to do here, my friend. But I really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. I really hope you're able to get something here. And again, I did hook you up with that free start sit question. I hooked you up with that free trade question. I definitely think you can be a playoff team. My concern is just with the bottom end of the roster and how we are constructing the players on the bench. But yeah, so if you have any trade questions, don't hesitate to send them my way. Like I said, you have that free trade voucher. Now, going over to this start sit question from Alex Berlin. Higgins isn't going to play, so this is really just Brian Thomas or Devonta Smith. Honestly, kind of ignore the rankings that came out today just because you got the positive news with Brian Thomas, the negative news with Smith. So I think we'd go Thomas. And then down in the flex, you could really consider Tracy over Devonta Smith here now that A.J. Brown is presumably going to be playing while at the same time Smith is banged up with a hamstring. And Tracy has a phenomenal matchup going up against Carolina. So it is a little bit of an awkward spot. I don't feel comfortable saying this with 100% certainty right now, but with how things are trending, I think you're probably going to start Tracy in the flex. But obviously, we are going to have to get confirmation of the situation in Philly before you make that call. Now, let's go over to our next trade question. This is coming out from MC Zelmers. This is Tracy and Pickens versus Debo and Deontay. Pickens to Debo, massive upgrade. Tracy to Deontay, clear downgrade. To be honest with you, I don't really know if Deontay Johnson is going to be viable here as a fantasy asset. I just don't know if he can get the target share that he would need in Baltimore. Obviously, we have Lamar here at quarterback. Wide receiver, we have Lamb, London, Neighbors. So we are already elite at wide receiver. Running back, we have two guys at the very top, but not a lot of depth. For me, I probably keep Tracy and Pickens. So let's go with Tracy and Pickens here. But it's close because I really like Deebo Samuel, but I think what's stopping me is Deontay Johnson's effectively a zero there. Sorry, we needed the fan on. We're sweating. But Ever is coming out. Appreciate you, my guy. Let me hook you up with both a free start sit question and a free trade question just in case you have anything else that you want to send my way. But we're sixth place at 4-5, third overall in points. We just acquired Flowers for Hubbard. What should I look to upgrade? Anything helps. Thanks, Mason. Thank you, my guy. Excited to dive into this. I'll say the Flowers for Hubbard deal looks great with Brooks coming back in. I don't know. We're third overall in points. Okay. But anyway, if we are 4-5, it doesn't matter how many points we've scored in terms of the strategy that this team has going into the future. Still, it's going to remain the same regardless that we are a team that's prioritizing wins right now rather than fantasy football playoff upside. Now, obviously, with that being said, it's nice to have the points tiebreaker just to make sure that we get into the playoffs. But anyway, with that being said, this is a league in which you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. So having an elite quarterback will make a big time difference. The wide receiver depth isn't going to be a big deal. And honestly, I'm really surprised that we are sitting here with 4 wins, considering you had both the injuries to Kupp as well as the injuries to McCaffrey. If these were like your first 2 picks in your draft and you're able to stick it out and be 4-5 and get both of them back at this point, I think we should be in a really strong spot and we should consider ourselves a strong contender. Looking at what you have with Lamar Jackson, obviously Lamar In a class of his own, in a tier of his own, must start player. Regardless of the matchup, there's no reason to roster another quarterback outside of his bye week. Going through and looking at what we have currently with the bench, we don't have another QB, which I personally like to see. Now, going over to what we have at wide receiver, we're currently sitting with Kupp wide receiver 1, Brian Thomas wide receiver 2, Zay Flowers wide receiver 3. So we're already in a very comfortable spot there at wide receiver. And again, since you can only start at the very most 3 wide receivers weekly, the depth isn't particularly going to matter here. And going down to what we have with the depth, we have Tank Dell as our 4th receiver, which I'm fine with. But what I really do like to see is the fact that we're not rostering more than 4 wide receivers. We know that we're strong at the top, so there's really just no reason for us to go through and for us to overload wide receiver depth at the very bottom. I mean, I would say that maybe if you were rostering a few more receivers, it makes sense to go through and sell Tank Dell. But if we only have 4 wide receivers on this team, I want to keep it as is. Going over to running back, we have CMC, so the elite RB1, presumably rest of season. Now, am I going to say that he's going to be by far and away the best player in fantasy? Probably be too aggressive of a projection. We have Kareem Hunt as a very strong option in the short term, of course. And that's what this team needs to prioritize since we are 4-5. On the bench, we have Josh Jacobs for the long term. Once we get through the bye, we're probably starting Jacobs and CMC every week. And maybe Hunt over Flowers in the flex until Pacheco comes back. And then I do like that we are prioritizing what we have with running back depth at the bottom end here, where we have guys like Madison and Keaton Mitchell. Now, while I definitely prefer rostering running backs here at the bottom, I know I can't see your waiver wire here. I just want to be on record that if you had the ability to go through and roster players instead like Braylon Allen, Tyler Algier, I would prefer those names over Keaton Mitchell down there at the very bottom end of the roster. Primarily because if I'm looking at Keaton Mitchell, I think that if we map things out, if you were to get an injury, say to Derrick Henry, more likely than not, you are going to see Keaton Mitchell split the backfield with Justice Hill. So if that is happening, then I realistically don't see a path for Keaton Mitchell to hit your starting lineup here, even in a spot in which you have a Derrick Henry injury, whereas Braylon Allen, Tyler Algier, those players, you get the injury to the running back in front of them, then they are auto starts. The main issue that you have with this team is the fact that we're rostering 3 tight ends. Cade Otton right now is a tier 1 tight end. He's phenomenal. Unbelievable. Evan Ingram is a tight end that you can rely upon that will give you volume rest of season with the Christian Kirk injury. Now, of course, if you are looking at what you have, say, with David Njoku. So here's the issue with this team. And I don't want to say with this team. It's just like fantasy football moves in general. We're looking at like David Njoku down here at the bottom end. And we go, okay, well, we can never start David Njoku, right? We're rostering 3 tight ends, all of whom have value, all of whom are very exciting. But realistically speaking, if we were to go out there and if we were to try to sell one of these players right now, the guy that we would love to sell would be David Njoku. It's like, okay, well, we're not starting Njoku over Evan Ingram ever. We're not starting him over Cade Otton, for sure, not with the injuries that you have in Tampa at the moment. But if you go to the waiver wire in your league and you try to throw David Njoku on, I'm not the waiver wire, the trade block in your league, you throw David Njoku out there, you're probably going to hear crickets. I can't imagine anybody going out and getting super excited to send you anything for him. So to be honest, what I would do if I were you and this may seem counterintuitive because the man is such a strong option at the moment, but he should probably be a little bit worse in the long term as you get a fully healthy Mike Evans and as you get a fully healthy Jalen McMillan, is I think Cade Otton is somebody that I would throw out in the trade block. Not because I don't like him, but just because we have 3 tight ends, and that's the guy that I know you're going to get interest in. People will be very excited to go through and trade for him. So if you could send maybe Cade Otton and, I don't know, Zay Flowers and go get a true wide receiver 1. I know it sounds crazy, but go get somebody in the Tyreek Hill range. I think if we're projecting things out, it's probably better for the roster, and that way you can go ahead, you can open up another roster spot. You still have Njoku and Evan Ingram to play the matchups with. You'll still have tight end 1 production effectively every single week. You can get a true alpha wide receiver 1. Or maybe, obviously, you can go through and make that 2-for-1 deal, move off of an option like Josh Jacobs and get an even better running back. But that's the move I would look to make. Now, of course, you can try to trade one of the bench tight ends. You can try to trade Evan Ingram. You can try to trade David Njoku. I just think that you're going to get significantly more, for the right reasons, of course, if you were to go out there and if you were to send Otton, and it would make a lot of sense for this roster. But I did hook you up with both a free start sit question and a free trade question. So if you have anything that you want to send my way, don't hesitate to. I'd be super happy to look at anything I can for you. But again, thank you again for supporting the channel. I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out. Now let's move this over to our next question. Coming out from Noah, says, we're 4-5. Running backs are Achane, Brian Robinson. Wide receiver, we have St. Brown, Tyreek Hill, DJ Moore. On the bench, we have Tank, Brooks, Tillman, Addison, and Evan Ingram. So Daniels to Stroud, massive downgrade, but effectively we're just getting the massive upgrade from the depth receivers to Malik Neighbors. So what would this do? I mean, I think you maybe have to do this. It friggin' sucks. Because the thing is, it doesn't look like Rome's startable unless you have a complete 180 here with Caleb, which is possible. But with JSN, expectations are that you are going to see a little bit of regression when you get Metcalf back into this offense. Neighbors is leading the NFL in targets per game at the moment. So Daniels, you do get the elite quarterback production. Stroud's just barely better than a streamer at this point. But presumably when you get Nico Collins back in, when you get DK Metcalf back in, I think it probably is going to be this Stroud and Neighbors side, but I hate selling Jaden Daniels, of course. Now, Joe coming out with our next question. This is Ridley and DJ Moore for Deebo Samuel. This is Deebo Samuel for me. I mean, just making sure we have enough wide receiver depth. Afterwards, we'll have Wilson, Smith, Deebo, Dell. Running back, we have Gibbs, Tracy, Dowdle. It's a league in which depth does matter a little bit more. What I would probably do if you were going to want to make this trade is I wouldn't fault you for just waiting a little bit and confirming that Devonta Smith is good to go with the hamstring, because if we were to go through and if we were to make this trade and then Smith is going to miss time with his hamstring injury, then our depth specifically for your format probably makes it a little bit tougher. Now, JMA Reed coming out with their next question. This is Breece versus Walker and Metcalf. For me, I think Breece and Walker are kind of in the same range where it is just going to be up to you. Obviously, it's annoying that the Seattle guys are in their bye week right now, but at the same time, Breece is yet to go through his bye, which is in week 12. So, yeah, I think you go ahead and you probably just take both of the Seattle players. As if I view Breece and Walker in a similar range, you're effectively just picking up DK Metcalf. I mean, a high-end wide receiver, too, for essentially free. Now, True Isaiah coming out says, should we do this trade based off our team currently? So again, I do want to reiterate, at this point, I have a very hard time seeing how Deontay Johnson in a low volume passing attack as the second option here. Obviously one of the best offenses in the league. It's just the team that's going to be running the ball an absolute ton. I have a hard time seeing how Deontay Johnson is super exciting. Tucker Krafts was a little unsustainable with the touchdowns he was scoring. Tight end, we have Pitts. I'm starting Pitts over Kraft most weeks. So for me, I would rather have Ladd McConkey. It'd be different if we didn't have a viable tight end, but I think Kyle Pitts is viable. Am I going to sit here and act like Kyle Pitts is Trey McBride? Of course not. But I don't know if Kraft is a massive upgrade over him, considering the touchdown regression we should expect there in Green Bay. Now, McCaffrey's calf coming out with our next question. Running back, you got to fire him up. You got to get McCaffrey in. I mean, most players coming off an injury, I would say, oh, it can't hurt to wait a week, see what you have. And I'm definitely not ranking McCaffrey as an elite RB1 his first week back in here. But, I mean, as an RB2, I do think that he is going to be a must-start option. There's the thing with McCaffrey as well is even if they don't give him a ton of usage, you know they will give him the goal line touch. You know he will be the receiving back and not Jordan Mason. So I think you have to play McCaffrey. Wide receiver, if Devonta Smith is good to go, we go, obviously, I mean, if Nico's good to go, you go Nico. If Nico's not, you go Devonta Smith. And if Smith isn't, you go Amari Cooper. And if Amari isn't, we probably go Leggett. So it's a lot of what ifs. I think we probably plan on Nico Collins and Devonta Smith here at wide receiver in a flex. And if one of these players isn't good to go, then at that point, you probably pivot over to Najee Harris in the flex spot. Now, Mac and Dane coming out says, team hit with major injuries at receiver, currently 3-6. So 3-6, we need optimized points right now in games played in the regular season. And here you do have both Wilson and Flowers slated to miss weeks 12 and 14 due to their buys. Achan's already through his bye week. It's a league in which wide receiver depth does matter. Wide receivers right now on our roster: Keenan Allen, Alan Lazard, Calvin Ridley, Darius Slayton, Gabe Davis, Elijah Moore. So I was very much ready to say there's no way in hell you make this trade. You need to go ahead. You need to hold on to Devon Achane. But specifically with your league settings where you can start up to 4 wide receivers weekly, and at the same time, your wide receiver room is a pile of garbage, yes, you probably go with Wilson and Flowers. But obviously, it's just absolutely brutal trading away Achane. Now, Ivan coming out with a question. This is Javonte and Flowers versus Deebo Samuel. This is Deebo for me. I know people are going to hate this. But, I mean, projecting this out into the future, with no Ayuk, Deebo should have seen an expanded target share. With Deontay coming in, Flowers is definitely the wide receiver 1 in his offense. But Deontay will long-term probably take some targets away from Flowers. Javonte Williams is in a bad offense, is possibly seeing added in competition from Audric Estime. So for me, yeah, I think it's an easy spot to go out there and upgrade to Debo. Now, Donkey coming out with our next question. This is Flowers versus Braylon Allen and Amari Cooper. I think this is the perfect example of just, it's up to you. Do you prefer Flowers? Do you prefer Amari? I personally have them ranked back-to-back in my rest of season ranks. If anybody was interested, Amari was at practice today. Keon Coleman was not. Can y'all please spam the chat? Would you rather have Amari Cooper or Zay Flowers rest of season? Clearly, Flowers has been significantly better than Amari so far. Flowers has been significantly better, but rest of season, who are you preferring? Okay, we got Danny, who we have shadow banned. That's why he couldn't find the stream. We've been trying to hide all the videos from Danny and the live stream from Danny this week. Can't have him learning some real sound advice here. I kept searching freshman. Okay, that's pretty good, my guy. Not gonna lie, it's pretty good. We got everybody in the chat saying Flowers by a mile. If it is Flowers by a mile, you go Zay Flowers. For me, I think it is just going to be up to you here, to be honest. But can everybody please spam the chat? L Danny. If you get it, Danny in the chat with an L Danny, that would be a little helpful here. Now, let's move this over. Need win CeeDee Lamb downs. Yeah, we got Lanny in the chat. But need a win, start Cousins or go pick up Darnold. I'm starting Cousins. Neither quarterback, ton of rushing upside. Cousins, since you had the blow up against Tampa, he's averaging almost 3 passing touchdowns per game. Actually, no. Darnold, you have the matchup against Jacksonville. Darnold, you have an implied team total that's about a point higher. So, reality, I do think it's up to you. I think you probably go get Darnold, though. I do like Cousins, though. We played Cousins last week in the Flock League. We're going to go with Breece there as our RB2. I would expect that Lamb's not playing this week. Danny, do you think CeeDee Lamb's playing this week? Danny is our resident Cowboys homer. Danny will know significantly more. Danny will know significantly more about Lamb's availability than I do. But Lamb wasn't at practice. Obviously, the Cowboys aren't really playing for anything. I don't see why CeeDee Lamb would rush himself back. Danny says Lamb's going to sit out if we were to guess. Yeah, and at the same time, you only have an implied team total of 17 points here for Dallas going up against Philly. So sportsbooks are already projecting this out to just be an absolute garbage offense. And I think some of that has to do, obviously, I mean, the majority of it has to do with no Dak, but possibly no Lamb here as well. Now, if Lamb does play, we'd go with Lamb at wide receiver. And then down there in the flex, we go Montgomery. So really we go Chase Brown. I didn't see Brown. So really the only pivot that you were to make is if Lamb doesn't play, then obviously at that point you pivot over to Marvin Harrison Jr., but I'm sure we're going to get more information very soon. Now our next question coming out from Slush Monkey. So trade question. We're sending Harrison for Mike Evans. I would rather have Evans at this point. Obviously, neither players through their bye week yet. So my expectation is you get one more game from Harrison than you would with Mike Evans. But Evans, in my mind, is going to be an absolute crusher, knowing the passing volume that's in the passing volume in Tampa is significantly higher than what you have in Arizona. And at the same time, the target share should dramatically be up with no Chris Godwin. So I'd go Evans. If you're a playoff team, of course. If you really need a play this week, then probably not. Amiss says, feel like I need to do a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 tier up. Well, running back, you go Henry and Barkley. And we have CMC, James. This is a nutso team. Tight end, we go Pitts. And then down in the flex, We have Brian Thomas that we probably have to bench in favor of CMC and James Cook. So, yeah, I mean, especially when you get Evans back in the long term, this is definitely a team that can afford to go out there and send a wide receiver depth piece and Kirk Cousins go get an elite quarterback there for the Superflex. Now, Apple coming out says, need wide receivers with Nico and Lamb hurt. Should we do this? Lamb to Tyreek, clear upgrade. Reed to Metcalf, lateral move up to you. Brooks to Brian Robinson, clear up. 100% you should do this. Like, I understand Tyreek's been disappointing in the sample that we've had with Tua. Over the past 2 weeks, I mean, it's been worse than any week that we would have really ever expected last season with the healthy Tua. But still, it is very much a small sample. You go back to week 1, Tyreek was very effective. Lamb's going to be in a garbage offense. Lamb's dealing with his own injury. For me, I think it's a very easy spot to pivot to Tyreek here if you're able to off of Lamb. Now, in Rick coming out with a start set. Here, running back, you go Kyron, and I'm assuming you start 2 running backs, so we go CMC as well. Wide receiver, if Nico plays, you go Nico. We go Nico and then Devonta Smith if Smith plays. If Smith doesn't, you go with Brian Thomas. So plans are Kyron, CMC, Nico, Smith, and then down here in the flex, Brian Thomas Jr. Now, the issue is if you don't have these guys cleared and good to go, like if, say, Smith misses practice again on Thursday, then you probably have to play Zay Flowers instead at wide receiver. That way you have a little bit more flexibility if anything were to occur late in the week. But obviously that is not something that we have clarity on right now. If everybody is healthy, the guy that you bench on this team is Flowers. Now, Bodie coming out with a question. This is Lamb and Ramadre versus Puka and Chase Brown. Lamb to Puka, I'm viewing it as an upgrade, to be honest. I mean, keep in mind, we had Lamb at like wide receiver 2 right before the week. Lamb was an elite level wide receiver for us. So going Ramadre to Chase Brown, it's so large an upgrade, it's not even funny based off the offenses that they play in. And also, I just expect the Rams to be a significantly better offense than what you have with the Cowboys going into the future. And at the same time, you have Lamb injured and Puka presumably healthy. So yeah, I go Chase Brown and Puka Nacua kind of easily. Like at these price points, I think Lamb could potentially be a sell. Surprised that y'all can get this, to be honest. Just the 2 of us coming out with our next question. Here, quarterback, you have no love this week. I will go Baker over Russ. I monitor the practice reports with Baker, though he did miss this past week's practice. I'm going over to wide receiver. We are going to be going, Harrison Downs. It is tough. Obviously, Harrison has the tough matchup. He has been very much up and down all season so far. If you look at my wide receiver ranks, I literally have them ranked back-to-back at wide receiver 22, wide receiver 23. So I probably go Harrison, but to be honest with you, Downs been so much more consistent. Downs is probably the right call. And then going over to running back. Running back, you have a bunch of great options here. We probably end up going with Kareem Hunt. I'm sorry, for the flex. Because for the flex, you're definitely wanting to go with the running back, with your running back room, this being strong. Being this strong. I don't know, I can't talk. But Tracy has a phenomenal matchup going up against the Panthers. So I wouldn't fault you at all if you wanted to go through and if you wanted to instead go with Tyrone Tracy. Now, just the 2 of us coming out with another question. Here, quarterback, I think we're going to be going with the combo of Stafford and Rodgers. Herbert, you're going up against the Tennessee offense that currently projects to be the worst offense in the NFL this week. So I'd assume that you probably don't have a ton of passing attempts for the Chargers here. Going over to what we have for the wide receivers. Wide receiver, for me, I go with Nico Collins if healthy. If Nico's not healthy, to be honest with you, I probably go Amari as the backup play. Just knowing that Amari was at practice where you didn't have Keon Coleman. So this is a great team. You have a bunch of options here. We're going to go with CMC in the flex. But just trying to think through this. If you have no Keon and Amari is fully good to go, and we can expect Amari to possibly get up to 70-75% of the snaps with Josh Allen. For me, I'd probably prefer Amari over Downs in that scenario. But obviously, we kind of need to wait for more info. Now, our next question is going to be coming out from Dan Arkeed. Really appreciate you. Going to be excited to check this out. Let me hook you up with a free start sit question. I know you're always out here with us, my guy. League switch from a 4-point passing touchdown to a 6-point. How do you rank these quarterbacks now, like top 20 rest of season? I have Kyler, but rushing upside is not as valuable, right? Should we trade him? 100%. Yes, that is how it works. And if your league made a dramatic shift like this during the season, that is freaking nuts. This is something you do before y'all draft teams. This is something y'all vote on in the offseason. I don't mind at all playing with 6-point per passing touchdowns. Honestly, I think it's maybe the preferable way to go about it because, yeah, it doesn't skew things dramatically towards the rushing upside. If you look at Kyler in a league in which you get 6 points per passing touchdown, it's going to be a lot easier for the quarterbacks that don't have any rushing upside to catch up to him. The guys like Kirk Cousins, the guys like Sam Darnold, the guys like Jared Goff. Those players are more valuable in a 6-point passing touchdown league, whereas Kyler Murray is the perfect example of somebody that's less valuable in a 6-point passing touchdown league, where the rushing upside, I mean, obviously still scores the same amount of points, but the quarterbacks that aren't going to run the ball can easily catch up where they couldn't otherwise. So, I mean, you're still playing Kyler over these other options, of course, but I mean, if you could trade Kyler and if you could pivot to somebody else, that would be preferable. Looking at wide receivers here, Jaden Reed's on bye. Chris Olave is obviously out. If Lamb plays, you go Lamb. If he doesn't, you go Ladd. Obviously, Ladd's the hope here for the flex, and we don't have to pivot off of Lamb, their receiver. But if Lamb misses, and we have to go with Ladd in the flex kind of regardless, you probably pivot over to Calvin Ridley there with your second wide receiver slot. But tough spot, be honest. Now, Ryan coming out with their next question says, got Pacheco coming back. I need a running back too until then. So let me be on record with this. You probably can't start Jonathan Brooks this week. And also, let me confirm, but I believe the Panthers have a bye week in week 11, right? Yeah, the Panthers have a bye week in week 11. So if you needed another running back, I would be completely fine trading away Cedric Tillman for Jonathan Brooks. But if you're telling me because of the Isaiah Pacheco injury, you need somebody that you can start now at running back, I don't think Brooks is that, because I think it would be very difficult to plan on starting him his first week in. And at the same time, I mean, the second weekend, it's a bye week. So the earliest you could start Jonathan Brooks is week 12. And at that point, maybe Pacheco, we're getting positive news of him returning. Now, LeVar Ball coming out with their next question says, flex, are we going to go Chase Brown or Brian Thomas Jr.? We're going to go with Chase Brown. And because he plays on Thursday night, you're going to go ahead, you're going to put him at running back. and move Kyron Williams down to the flex spot just in case anything happens. And then projected to win by 10, but tough with Chase Brown playing on Thursday. And Brian Thomas Jr. popped up with an injury. Yeah, for me, I think Chase Brown's just, regardless of Brian Thomas Jr.'s availability, is the best option here. And that if you are looking at Chase Brown, you have the 3-down workload in a great offense in what should be the highest scoring game of the week. So, I mean, Khalil Herbert may play, but at the same time, it's a short week. It's his first week in here, so I'd be very surprised if Khalil Herbert had a large role whatsoever. Chase Brown is slated to just absolutely crush. And I freaking hate it as somebody who has to play against them this week, but it is what it is. If you have Chase Brown, for the love of God, start him. Eli Davis's thoughts on either of these two trades. So first trade is Jacobs, Harrison, Worthy for AJ Brown. This is a 12-team league where you start 2 receivers and 1 flex. Running back, we have Taylor, Breece, Tracy. Wide receiver, we'd have Chase, Tyreek, AJ Brown. It's a lot, but honestly, you can afford it. Let's go get AJ Brown here. And then the second deal, we would effectively be throwing Tracy on it for Najee Harris. I do have Tracy ranked slightly ahead of Najee. I mean, honestly, you could still make this deal if you want. I would definitely prefer the one in which we keep Tyrone Tracy, though. I would prefer the one in which we keep Tyrone Tracy out of the 2. But regardless, it's a league in which the depth's not super important. And at the same time, you have absolute studs inside the starting lineup. So presumably, I think you could go through and I think you could afford to make a move like that. Now, Guap coming out with a free team review. Appreciate you, my guy. Thank you so much for taking advantage of that underdog offer. Saying, hey, Mason, we're sitting at 6-3 in third place where only 4 teams make the playoffs. Was wondering what we could do to secure the playoff slot and win. Well, let's go ahead and let's dive into this. This is Team X, currently the second team in the league analyzer here. We are 6-3, so we are in a really good spot in terms of being able to think for the long term and plan for the fantasy football playoffs here. Starting off with what we have at quarterback, we are currently rolling with Jalen Hurts. So we have the elite QB that you're able to start every single week, regardless of matchup. This guy is also already through his bye, so presumably you don't need another quarterback here. You have Sam Darnold currently. Obviously, Darnold's a pretty strong option, but much better than the average QB streamer, or a little bit better than the average QB streamer. But to be honest with you, I just don't necessarily see how we ever need them. Looking at the quarterbacks that are available on your waiver wire, you have guys like May, Stafford, Russ, Rodgers. So if you did get an injury to Hurts, you could potentially go out there and pick up another streamer. So, I mean, obviously, if you could sell Darnold for somebody, we would love to. The reality of the situation is you probably need to go through and you probably just need to cut or consider cutting Sam Darnold's and possibly picking up a player like Cedric Tillman with some upside for free off waivers. My only hesitation is, like, if we were to prioritize bringing a new player onto this roster off the waiver wire, it would probably need to be at the running back position, and that we're strong at the top, but we really don't have much depth below. Where we are currently sitting with Jahmyr Gibbs, James Conner. James Conner is the number 1 playoff schedule of any running back in fantasy. So really love that for a playoff team. I would love to go through and move off of Dowdle if possible. Like, if you could sell Sam Darnold and Rico Dowdle in a 2-for-1 deal to go get an upgrade at running back that way, it's a no-brainer. Just much easier said than done. The reality of the situation is, like, Darnold's just in the tier of guys that probably nobody is going to be trading for. And going over to wide receiver, it's a league in which you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. So the wide receiver depth doesn't matter. And we have a ton of it. I mean, we have the elite guys at the top. According to the league analyzer, we have the number one team in the league at wide receiver, where we have A.J. Brown, Brian Thomas, Jaden Reed, all three of whom, obviously, we're very excited to start every single week. We have Tank Dell, Myers, Shakir, Keon as quality depth pieces. And you even have some pretty solid options down there on the waiver wire, such as Cedric Tillman. So for me, the very easy play here with this roster, and a lot of it's to do with the league settings, of course, plus the fact that we are just elite at wide receiver in the first place, is, I mean, if you could go through and if you could presumably sell a wide receiver depth piece in a 2-for-1 deal, go get an upgrade to an elite level tight end. Say you sell Jaden Reed and Kyle Pitts and go get to George Kittle, it'd be an absolute no-brainer. If you could sell maybe Tank Dell and George Kittle, or Tank Dell and Sam Laporta, and go get to Trey McBride, let's do it right away. And if you can make that 2-for-1 deal where we sell the wide receiver depth piece to effectively upgrade anywhere inside the starting lineup, I think that would be the preferred move, because then you can open up the roster spot and you can just backfill with some of these cheap options like Khalil Herbert, Cedric Tillman for completely free. And you have so much wide receiver depth that, frankly, it's just not a big deal regardless. But I really appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. And again, thank you so much for being a member of the flock, supporting the channel. And thank you for taking advantage of that free team review as well. Now, Jay Colley coming out with our next question says, hey, Mason, does this make sense for me with my team? Flex would be Amari, JSN, or Deontay. Too heavy on Cincy? ? Not at all. So if we have multiple wide receivers that we can be considering for the flex, I know we have Burrow, Chase Brown. It doesn't freaking matter. A running back, we still have Chase Brown, Saquon Barkley. We have Charbonnet. The thing is, you would just be rostering so few running backs if you make this move. You have to make this move, by the way. It's just too good of a value. And the Cincinnati Bengals offense is one of the offenses in which you don't really need to be worried about, quote unquote, being too invested into it. My only thing is, I think you probably should go through and look to move off of like Kyler Murray in a 2-for-1 deal to go get an upgrade elsewhere, open up a roster spot and be able to bring in the backup RB and then drop maybe the backup tight end for another running back as well. Now, our next free team review coming out from Adias Fit. Appreciate you. Excited to check this out. Says, thanks, Mason. I listen to you daily on my commute. I'm third in my league, but I'm not sure my roster is set to win a championship despite being quote unquote good. Any advice is most appreciated. I'm open to anything. Really appreciate you and excited to dive into this, my friend. This is the number one team in the league analyzer, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to help you out much with this. We are currently 6-3, so obviously we are thinking for the fantasy football playoffs. This is a roster in which you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, so it's not a super high priority for us to go through and for us to build around wide receiver depth. But obviously having an elite quarterback would make a difference with this team. We are currently sitting with Jared Goff at QB, so we have a streaming option here. Specifically because it is a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex format. I would actually really like for us to go through and if we could potentially upgrade over Jared Goff at QB, going over to what you have at running back. You're currently sitting with Achane as well as Kamara. So 2 elite RBs that we can start every single week with very little hesitation. We have James Cook as a low-end RB1, a high-end RB2 here as well. We have Rachaad White as a depth piece, Jordan Mason, Zach Charbonnet as guys that are an injury away from making a pretty big difference. So I love the running back room. I mean, obviously, Rachaad White is that sell high candidate. We had him as a sell high option last week. I think maybe coming off the Kansas City game, it's going to be a little bit tougher now. But if you could, I would still really like to go through and throw Rachaad White on the trade block. And if you could potentially move off of, say, Jared Goff and Rachaad White in a 2-for-1 deal to go get a noticeable upgrade there at quarterback, I think that'd be great. Going over to what you have at wide receiver, you're currently sitting with Malik Neighbors. So we have a top 10 wide receiver one that we can start every single week. We have Lamb, who obviously Lamb gets hurt in a big time way in the short term, not only due to his injury, but to Dak's injury as well. But specifically here for your roster, you're in a situation in which you're a little more incentivized to build long-term for the playoffs. So Lamb should be back by that point. We have Pickens, Ricky Pearsall, Adam Thielen, so not phenomenal wide receiver depth. And then we have Pitts and Hawkinson. So we have some upside here at tight end, right? But not one of those locked and loaded, just alpha studs that we can comfortably rely upon going into the future. So here for me, I think the very easy thing to say is if we can sell that additional running back depth piece, such as Rachaad White, and if you are able to go ahead, package him with a player like Jared Goff and go get the elite quarterback in a league in which you only start 2 wide receivers, 1 flex. So quarterback's going to make up a very high percentage of our starting lineup output weekly. That's going to be what I would personally look to do. In terms of other potential moves that you could make, if we are just talking waiver wire pivots, definitely not like a must do waiver pivot, but maybe if you wanted to go ahead and move off of, say, Zach, I would actually move off of Adam Thielen. I don't know if you have Thielen in your IR slot or Thielen's on the active roster, but if you could cut Thielen and pick up Travis Etienne, I mean, even if it takes a Tank Bigsby injury, I could see Thielen having a clear path to actually making a difference. I could see Etienne having a clear path to actually make a difference with your league settings in comparison to Thielen. But the main thing, of course, is going through and seeing if we can sell Rachaad White and go get a significant upgrade there at quarterback. But much easier said than done. However, it is a 12-team format, so you can presumably see one of the teams in your league actually interested in going through and trading for that running back that has been producing as of late. But I really do appreciate you, and I really hope I was able to help you out in some way here, my friend. But thank you so much for supporting the channel and taking advantage of that free team review. Now, let's move this over to our next question coming out from Seth Keegan. Here, we need a running back, which is CMC very easily. Wide receiver, we are going to go ahead and we are going to plan on playing Devonta Smith. And do I really have to say this? Am I really going to have to tell you to play Waddle? I have Waddle and Shakir ranked back-to-back at this moment. If either Keon Coleman or Amari Cooper miss, and you wanted to go through and you wanted to play Shakir instead, I'm not going to fault you whatsoever for going Shakir over Waddle with how bad Waddle's been. Tight end, Kittle, must start play regardless. And you know what? F it. You're going to play both Shakir and Waddle anyway. You're going to throw Shakir in the flex. Now, monitor Smith, though. Smith missed practice. If Smith does not play, then at that point, Jawan Jennings would be your backup pivot. Okay. But let's go ahead and don't know why we highlighted everything. Let's pull this back up. So next question coming out from, I believe, Jay Lucas. Appreciate you, my guy. Going to be really excited to check this out. Let me hook you up with both a free start sit question as well as a free trade question, just in case there's anything that we may not cover here that you want discussed on top. It says, feel really good about the team. What moves would you make to improve it based on trades that we could be looking at? So team name here is Gibbs It To Me Baby. We are currently the third team in the league analyzer. It is a league in which the top 3 teams have a pretty significant edge. Then you have the teams at 4 and 5, and then the teams 6 through 10 are kind of garbage. It is a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, 10 team league. So depth is almost completely irrelevant here. There should be quality depth options down there on the waiver wire. Not only should there be quality depth options on waivers, but at the same time, you are in a situation in which you can only get a small select few into your starting lineup every week regardless. So looking at what we have at quarterback, we are currently rolling with the elite quarterback with Josh Allen. So obviously very little to say here. You are in a super comfortable spot that you aren't having to roster a backup quarterback until you get to week 12 for the bye. Then obviously at that point you can go through and you can pick up another QB, just whoever you prefer with the matchup. But you'll have plenty of quarterbacks that we can choose from looking at the waiver wire, but not picking up one of those guys until week 12. Now going over to what we have at running back. Running back, we have Bijan, Gibbs, Montgomery. So we are just firing in both of the Detroit backs every single week, which obviously is completely fine to do if you are considering how good this offense and how good this offensive line is. For me, I just see absolutely zero path. I mean, no path whatsoever for you to get Rico Dowdle into the starting lineup. It pains me to say, obviously, we had Dowdle as the buy low candidate a few weeks back. But now at this point, with the injury that you have to Dak Prescott, I think going through and possibly moving off of Rico Dowdle in a 2-for-1 deal elsewhere could make a lot of sense if you can find a team that maybe needs some help at running back. Now, the issue is it's a 10-team league, so realistically speaking, who truly needs Rico Dowdle? Like that team can get by. This team maybe is losing out on Chuba Hubbard. So if you could potentially send them like Dowdle and DeAndre Hopkins and somehow get to Tyreek Hill, it would be an absolute no-brainer if you could do that. And obviously they're not losing Hubbard for good, but you have Brooks coming in. Another thing that you could look to do is if you don't see a path for us to start Dowdle anytime soon, and we are a team that we shouldn't just only be thinking about the fantasy football playoffs. I mean, we're 5-4. We can begin to think about it and be a little bit balanced here. But you could also look to pivot off of Dowdle and go get a running back that could potentially turn into a must-start guy every single week for you when you get to the fantasy football playoffs. I move on from Dowdle and instead maybe go get Isaiah Pacheco. I think that could potentially be a little interesting. Going over to what you have at wide receiver, we currently are sitting with Jefferson, Hopkins, Harrison, JSN, and Jalen Waddle. So, I mean, obviously here, it's always a situation in which when you can take a wide receiver depth piece that's popping off in a league in which you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex and go make a 2-for-1 deal to get an upgrade elsewhere, it's something that we want to do. I think here, the best example of that is if you could presumably take Jackson Smith and Jigba coming off of a monstrous performance and package him with Sam Laporta to go get an upgrade to a tight end that you feel comfortable that you can start every single week. I think that would be a very clear play because the fact of the matter is, while JSN looks great when DK Metcalf is in here, realistically speaking, I don't know if you're ever starting JSN considering the fact that we have Jefferson, Hopkins both through their bye. You have the long-term upside of Harrison. Waddle could potentially be better in the future than what he has been. So it's a phenomenal team. I don't really see any clear waiver wire pivots for you to make here. If you wanted to sell a running back, I think that guy is Dowdle. Again, there are a couple different ways you can go about that. Maybe pivoting over to that long-term option. Or maybe you can go through and you could look to sell him and a 2-for-1 deal with Laporta to go get an upgrade at tight end that way. Or again, we can go ahead and potentially look to try to sell JSN to go get that upgrade at tight end with Sam Laporta, just given the fact that the depth here isn't really going to matter and there's no real path for those guys to turn into just absolute must-start options in your lineup every single week. But really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. And again, thank you so much for being a member of the vlog. I hooked you up with both a free start sit question and a free trade question as well. So if there is anything else that you want to send my way, don't hesitate to. I'd be super happy to check it out for you. But let's move this over to our next question. Coming out from Flock Linden. Here, this is Gibbs, Harrison versus Achane and Collins. Going from Gibbs to Achane, slight upgrade / lateral move, whatever you want to view it, doesn't really matter, because the fact of the matter is going from Harrison to Nico. Ooh, I'm sorry. This is a Dynasty league. I apologize. This is a Dynasty league. This is much tougher. In a redraft format, it's an absolute no-brainer. Now, obviously, it seems like Nico's not that old, and Nico isn't that old, right? I mean, it's not like Nico Collins is in the same class as A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, etc., etc. But Nico Collins is already on his second contract. So Nico Collins turns 26 this offseason. So for Dynasty fantasy football purposes, we should presumably see a hit with what you have with Nico in comparison to his Dynasty value with Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, I'm pretty damn confident saying that Harrison's going to be worth more than Nico Collins this offseason. So for me, from a Dynasty perspective, I think you go Gibbs and Harrison here, unless you were an extremely strong contending roster where you needed to think about what you were doing right this second. Now, Big Yosh coming out with our next question. It's a free team review. Appreciate you for taking advantage of that underdog offer. My friend says, team's been struggling since the loss of Nico. Need some help getting the locker room morale going. Any moves you think can be made? Well, the locker room morale should be a little bit better with Nico Collins coming back this week. My guy should really rally up the troops here. We are currently second in the league analyzer, so supposedly we have a lot of value on the roster, but we are currently sitting at 3-6. So obviously 3-6, you are kind of a winner go home mentality here. You can still technically make the playoffs with 7 losses, but it would be a very, very difficult task to accomplish. Now, looking at what we have at quarterback, we are currently sitting with the combo of Love and Caleb. So we are planning on streaming Caleb this week, looking at other quarterbacks off waivers. For me, I would probably prefer an option like May that just gives you a little more rushing upside based off what we've seen in the limited sample. But not going to fault you at all if you wanted to go with Caleb. It's not like there's a massive, massive difference between the two options. Going over to what we have at running back, we have Kyron. So we have the locked and loaded RB1 rest of season. I mean, true 3-down workhorse, top 3 running back in fantasy. We have Tracy, Dowdle, Brooks. So Dowdle is one of these players that maybe you do still have the long-term upside for the fantasy football playoffs when you get Dak Prescott back into this offense. The issue is we're 3-6. That's win or go home mode. So for us, if we could get an upgrade over Dowdle, it would make a ton of sense. Obviously, much easier said than done, but still. I'm going through and looking at what we have, say, at wide receiver. We have Nico coming back in, which just makes this wide receiver room so much better. We have Reed, Terry as quality depth pieces. Nico, Reed, Terry, none of them are through their respective buys yet, however. So it probably does make sense for us to hold on a little bit more to the wide receiver depth. Going over to tight end, there's just absolutely no reason for us to be rostering 3 tight ends here. So if we're looking at what you have with this roster, I think you're in a really good spot. And I think you just got extremely unlucky with the Nico Collins injury. But with Nico coming back in, realistically, you should be much better going into the future. And really the only thing to do in my mind is fix up the roster construction a bit where we're not rostering 3 tight ends here. So for me, what I would presumably look to do is I would, one, figure out who are you not starting? Who could you not put in your lineup over the other 2 options? If you can't see yourself starting Taysom Hill this week, probably just go ahead and cut Taysom Hill. If you can't see yourself starting Sam Laporta this week, just go ahead and cut him. Now, obviously, plan A would be let's go to a tight end needy team and let's go and offer them any 3 of these tight ends, whichever one they want, and Rico Dowdle, and try to go get a running back upgrade and somebody that's going to be effective right this second where you don't have to be concerned about the injury to Dak Prescott. Now, it's just much easier said than done because if we are looking at this grouping of tight ends, it's very much the range in which they're like a little too good to cut and not good enough to get much value out of. So the clear move is trying to sell one of these tight ends, either with Jordan Love to go get to one of the big 4 quarterbacks, with Rico Dowdle to go get a viable running back in the short term, or just go ahead and possibly cut one. And if you were to cut a tight end here, I would probably be cutting Taysom Hill, and I'd be picking up Raheem Mostert off the waiver wire. But the team should be a lot better now that we have Nico back in. But I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. Again, thank you so much, my friend, for being a member of the flock, supporting the channel, and hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. And yeah, thank you again for taking advantage of that free team review. Now, Trent coming out with our next question. This is a start sit quarterback. We are looking at Caleb Tua Nix. Bo Nix has been the best quarterback out of this group for quite some time now, in fantasy purposes, that is. But with that being said, it's a brutal matchup going up against KC. And Garrett, if you signed up to Underdog Fantasy during the offseason with code FLOCK, you should have gotten the free draft guide. The free team review started September 5th. But if we're looking at Bo Nix going into the future, this is a really tough matchup that you have this week going up against KC. I think you lower expectations with this Broncos offense. I would go ahead and I would take Tua here, to be honest. Tight end, we are going to go ahead and between Laporta, Hunter Henry, I have them ranked back-to-back in my tight end rankings this week. Henry's been a lot better than Laporta since you have Drake May taking over as the starter here. Now, with that being said, I am an idiot. And I have a very difficult time playing the tight end that is in an offense that, according to sportsbooks, projects out to score about 10 fewer points this week than what you have in Detroit. And going down to the flex, I'm going to go ahead. I will play Marvin Harrison Jr. It's a tough matchup against the Jets, but at the same time, it's just so much of a better offense than what you're looking at specifically with the Dallas Cowboys. Now, our next question coming out from Night Train. Here, this is Waddle, Flowers, Mooney versus Kupp and Swift. The Flowers to Kupp, clear upgrade. Waddle to Swift, clear upgrade. You're paying Mooney to get it done. Yeah, in my mind, this is going to be very easily the Cooper Kupp and DeAndre Swift side. Very easily the Kupp and Swift side. Now, going over to our next question here. This is Bongs Away. 7-2. Bad rule allowing only 15 acquisitions per year. I have one left. Should I trade for depth? No, you're definitely holding on to Lamar in this. And honestly, I would say that regardless of... Actually, no, never mind. Let me really think this through. I was thinking in the lens of like, oh, I only have one transaction left. That means we don't want to be making a mediocre trade and losing our last transaction when we may need it for something else. But I didn't think about it in the context of like, oh, okay, well, if we're going to have no more waiver wire pivots, then it puts you in a very, very tough spot if you have an injury or two. So depth is going to be more valuable. So I'm going to be honest, the closest I have ever been to a league with these settings is playing in a league where you don't have a limited amount of transactions, but every transaction costs $1. Where it disincentivizes people to go through and make 1,000 different moves. But I hate the league setting. You already knew I was going to say that. Looking at the depth that we have currently, we have Chase, Mixon, Harrison, A.J. Brown, Puka and Lamb. You already have plenty of depth. We're not doing this deal. I understand that depth maybe matters more with these league settings. But I think you can get by as is. So, no, we're going to hold on to Lamar and Harrison. Now, code name Kid Next Door. Coming out with our next question. This said Dynasty trade where we're looking at a early second and Barkley versus Jahmyr Gibbs. So looking at Barkley versus Gibbs, I mean, this is just a very clear trade where we know what it's going to look like. The Barkley side obviously wins this season, and the Gibbs side is obviously going to be worth more in the offseason. Come this offseason, Saquon Barkley will be 3 years removed from the rookie contract. Saquon Barkley will be 28 years old. And Jahmyr Gibbs will be worth dramatically more in Dynasty. Right or wrong, regardless of what you think of it. But if you are a contending team, especially getting the second round pick, it is a very fair price point if you wanted to go out there and if you wanted to get Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm sorry, get Saquon Barkley. So in my mind, it's a very fair trade. I can't see the record that we have here, but we can look at the fact that we have Bijan, we have Taylor, we have St. Brown, we have Tyreek, we have Chase. So we're probably a contending roster. So if you're a contending roster, I don't mind either side of this deal. I think it's a fair trade. I was going to ask the chat, but I'm assuming the vast majority of people in the chat don't play Dynasty. I probably go Gibbs because I don't necessarily think you need the production for Barkley to win this year with how strong your roster is. And at the same time, if you're looking at Jahmyr Gibbs in this context, he is one of the very few cornerstone assets at the running back position in Dynasty. Okay, but let's go ahead and let's dive into this next question coming out from Braden Ween Fertner. Says, feel like I need to trade away some of my depth for a swing for the fences and or improve our quarterback tight end positions. I will say when we're looking at this league, it is a 10-team, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex format. So you are highly incentivized to have the elite quarterback. You are highly incentivized to have the elite tight ends. So definitely if you can, go get an upgrade at those individual positions, I would. This is tailor-made here. There are 3 teams at the top in a little juggernaut pattern here with the league analyzer. We are one of them. Then there is a pretty significant fall off to the rest of the league. We are currently sitting at 6-3 and 100% you need to trade for a better quarterback. We're currently streaming QBs, which is fine in some league settings, which is fine with some teams. But when you have a juggernaut roster like this in a shallow formats, there's no reason for us to not have the elite level QB. We are sitting with Mixon, Taylor, so presumably 2 RB1s. James Cook, low-end RB1, high-end RB2, but you get the receiving usage, you get the red zone involvement in what should be a very, very good offense. So when we look at Tracy here, I mean, obviously Tracy has been great. We had him as a sell-high candidate after the Pittsburgh game. To be honest, he's about to absolutely crush Carolina this week. I just don't see how you get Tracy into your starting lineup with how strong your roster is. And in that context, I think if we are trying to make a swing for the fantasy football playoffs, like going through and potentially packaging together Tracy and Stafford. I mean, honestly, doing a package isn't going to do much. It's not like anybody's really trading for Stafford. It's not the piece they want in the deal. But just trading Tracy for a quarterback from a running back needy team, that could make a lot of sense for you here. Like going through and looking at teams that possibly need some help at running back. This team, their RB2s are Madre, their RB3s are Rashad White. They don't really have that quarterback that would really make a difference for us. I mean, if you don't want to trade away Tracy, another thing you could look to do is trade away James Cook. This team has both Jaden Daniels and Josh Allen. They could very much use another running back piece here. But I mean, if you could send them, say, the combo of, you don't even need to send a combo. If you can send them James Cook straight up for Jaden Daniels, James Cook straight up for Josh Allen, that would be an absolute no-brainer. They don't need both. Obviously, I would prefer to go ahead and see if we could sell Tracy. I would just imagine that they're probably going to shoot us down on that. So Cook's probably the guy we have to end up going with. Wide receiver, we are looking at A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Evans, Pickens. So I would really like to take a wide receiver like Pickens and go and get that upgrade at tight end by packaging with Ferguson if we could. The only hesitation in saying that is it is going to be tougher for us to go through and for us to presumably sell a player like Pickens in a 10-team, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league in comparison to the running back, just because it's easier to find a team that's willing to trade for the running back depth piece with these league settings than a wide receiver. But yeah, that's the move we want to make, is see if we can go and get an upgraded quarterback and an upgraded tight end by those 2-for-1 deals. And I think it would honestly put you in a great spot, where we are already in a great spot, though. I mean, we are 6-3, of course. Now let's move this over to 44 MSU. Longtime member of the flock, always happy to see you. Let me go ahead and hook you up with both a free trade question and a free start sit question, my guy. Saying, like where the teams are at, even though we lost Godwin and Olave now, who are we looking to go after? The only teams that really do any trading are Tyler and the Gibbs team, but would still like possible trades to send for the others. Both want Jacobs, but I'm willing to use Walker as well to go after a high-end wide receiver. Thank you. No, thank you, of course, for being with us for so damn long now. But so the teams that are willing to trade, let's just make sure that we open these up right now. We said, I'm assuming when you say Taylor and Gibbs, because we said Tyler. Let's just go ahead and let's look to see which teams. Is there a Tyler that I'm not thinking of other than Tyler Lockett's? But I'm assuming maybe he meant Taylor. Okay, so let's look at Taylor and Gibbs, just so we can open these teams up and see what they would potentially need and what we could potentially. 44 MSU says team names Tyler. Oh, Tyler's finna run this league. Okay, that's why. Perfect. Thank you, my friend. And then Tyler and Gibbs. Okay, so also, if you have any questions while we're going over this, please drop them in the chat. I'll be happy to try to get to as many as we can for you, my guy. But let's go ahead. Let's open up our team. 6-3. It is a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league, so wide receiver depth's not going to matter much. And we're already doing exactly what I would want to. We are already rostering a ridiculous amount of running backs down here at the very bottom. Looking at quarterback, we have the elite QB with Josh Allen. So don't need to roster another. I mean, if we were looking at potential waiver wire plays, you have guys like Caleb, May, Tua, Stafford. So we have plenty of quarterbacks. When we get to week 12, at that point, we'll just go ahead and we'll pick up another QB, of course. Going over to what we have at running back, we are currently sitting with Bijan Walker. So we have 2 elite level RBs. We have Chase Brown, Josh Jacobs. So, I mean, we are just absolutely freaking loaded here. So Chase Brown looks to be an RB1 at this point. Jacobs kind of in that same realm where he should be a high-end RB2, low-end RB1. So going through and looking at a player like Tracy, there's just no path whatsoever for Tracy to make a difference in inside your starting lineup. But this is why we roster so many of these running backs that could be that hot waiver wire pickup, because when you get somebody to pop like Tyrone Tracy off the waiver wire, that guy's a lot easier to sell than the wide receiver that pops off waivers. Like if you compare like Tillman and Tracy, it's a lot easier to go through and look to trade Tracy at this point and find somebody that could potentially use that additional depth there at running back than it would be wide receiver. So we've already kind of hit what we needed to with that unique player off of the waiver wire there. I think at this point, going ahead and trying to package together Tracy and another option elsewhere is the play that we want to be making. The issue is we go over to wide receiver. It's like, okay, well, I really like St. Brown rest of season. I really like Debo rest of season. Chris Olave has more value for us than he will for somebody else. Obviously, if we are sitting here at 6-3, we are thinking long-term. We are thinking for the fantasy football playoff upside. So I don't particularly know really what we can be expecting if we were to go out there and try to if we were to try to sell Olave. Maybe we say F it and do it anyway. Another thing you could look to do is potentially just pivot off of Tracy and go get a player like Mike Evans. The receiver that obviously is going to miss this week, has the bye week in week 11, but potentially comes back in week 12. And then at that point, you are in a situation in which you do have just the elite level production. With no Godwin in that offense. I think that would be a very clear play if we could make it. Going over to what you have at tight end, we have the elite tight end with McBride, somebody that we can start every single week regardless. So you have by far and away the best team in the league here. It's not even remotely close. Even with the Olave injury, we still have St. Brown and Debo through their respective bye weeks. You only have to start 2 wide receivers. So it's not like we're panicking here at all. The only thing that's worth really pointing out is that if you could go through and if you could package together one of that running back depth piece that just hit, that will never be in our starting lineup, and go and get that upgrade there at wide receiver, I think that would be very much advantageous for us. But again, we have a phenomenal roster. It's not like this is a situation in which we need to do anything. I think just going through and trading away that running back piece that's providing a ton of value today for the wide receiver that could potentially give the elite ceiling in the long term could make some sense. But I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. Again, please, I hooked you up with both the free start sit question and the free trade question on the site. So if you have anything, you can feel free to send it in the site. Also, if you have anything that you want to say in the chat right now for us to look at, I'd be super happy to go back and forth with you in the chat. Just please leave anything there and then we can get back to the team, my friend. But really appreciate you sticking with us for so damn long now, of course, and great team. Now, Jay Allison coming out with our next question. This is Lamb versus Terry McLaurin and Brian Thomas Jr. We can't see any information about this roster. In the short term, 100% we win this deal with Terry and Brian Thomas Jr. The only hesitation, of course, is, okay, well, if we think long-term where potentially Dak Prescott does manage to come back in, then at that point, it could be a spot where Lamb goes back to being a top 3 wide receiver, where we're probably not expecting to see that from Terry or Brian Thomas. If you were making this deal, I'd want it to be on a team where we are not guaranteed to be in the playoffs. If you're like 7-2 right now, I'd probably rather keep Lamb. Kath Reg coming out says, traded Dell for Debo. Hope that was smart. That was extremely smart. Gibbs and probably James Cook are going to be the 2 guys that we're going with this week. A good matchup for Cook. Going over to wide receiver, we're going to go with Chase, obviously, every single week. Debo is a must-start guy every week here as well. We're going to go with Cade Otton at tight end. If we could trade away one of the tight ends, we would. And then going down to the flex spot, we are just going to plug and play David Montgomery. And obviously, I'm assuming that most weeks we are starting both Lions running backs. Now, our next switch coming up from Pedro. So start sit where 5-4, also Giants or Falcons defense, and CJ's on the waiver wire. I will go Goff over CJ for this week. Rest of season, though, if you are thinking about what you get here with CJ Stroud when Nico Collins is 100% healthy, I think you potentially have more upside with CJ Stroud. So, I mean, I would probably prefer Goff this week, but rest of season, probably Stroud. And then going down to what we have in the running back slots, Najee versus Brian Robinson. Assuming Robinson's going to go, we will go in that direction. Now, a big thing, of course, is figuring out if Brian Robinson will play, but expectations are that he is going to. Going down, expectations are London's good to go as well. We'll play St. Brown at wide receiver, though. We're probably going to go London in the flex. Tight end, we're going to go with Evan Ingram with the injuries that we have in Jacksonville. And then we'll play Drake London in the flex. And if Drake London does not play, then we'll pivot over to Najee Harris. Now, the notorious one always happen to see us. So should we trade Cade Otton for Brian Robinson Jr.? My tight end is Kraft. I think in the short term, you probably lose this deal. In the short term, Cade Otton is that top 4 tight end that's in the same range as Kelsey, McBride, Bowers every single week. It'd be very tough to be excited about someone more than you are currently with Cade Otton. Now, in the long term, when presumably you end up getting back in, say, I don't know, Mike Evans after the bye week, I think then Cade Otton does slide just a bit. I'm not going to sit here and act like he's not still a must-start tight end every single week when that does happen. But I think it'll make the trade going for Brian Robinson look a lot better. So I think long-term is probably the Robinson side. Now, J-Rod says, wide receiver help, Zay for London. Oh, London by a mile. Also, who can I get for Kareem Hunt? Go to the trade finder real quick. And I apologize for that. Let's pull this up. Kareem Hunt. Let's look for some smaller deals. And let's try to only look at one quarterback, 10, 12 team leagues. Somebody traded Hunt for Tillman. I'd rather have Hunt. Somebody traded Hunt, Goddard, Higgins for Kelsey. Somebody traded Hunt, Rashad White for Kenneth Walker. Give me Kenneth Walker. Hunt, DJ Moore for Drake London. If you're a playoff team, maybe London there. Hunt and Nick Chubb for Amari Cooper. Hunt for DK Metcalf. I'd love to sell Hunt for Metcalf if you needed a wide receiver. But 100% you trade Zay Flowers for Drake London. I mean, here, if you are looking at what you get with London going into the future, it sounds like he should be good to go and not miss any time. And of course, at the same time, if we are looking at London, it's just an offense where it's easier to project out the passing volume. They're not nearly as rush heavy as what you have in Baltimore. Now, Arnick coming out with our next question. This is a Dynasty Superflex where we are sending Justin Herbert. Why is it tagging Herbert so low in these ranks? Can I make sure I have Justin Herbert in my rest of season ranks? Real quick. What is happening there? Please tell me I didn't accidentally remove Justin Herbert from the rankings. Okay. Justin Herbert's 23. But regardless. Tracy, rookie running back, obviously expanding his role. Herbert, MB2, blah, blah, blah. You get Lamar Jackson here. Lamar Jackson, completely different tier of asset. With Tracy, this is where it's always unique with running backs in Dynasty, where you'd naturally say, oh my gosh, look at how good he's been as a rookie. I mean, Tracy's only going to get better going into next season, which is definitely a possibility, but it's not a guarantee in Dynasty at the running back position. So whenever you get the ability to go through and maybe look to pivot off like this, where you can get to the true elite asset that is kind of untouchable with Lamar Jackson, I think this probably helps you win right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if it has more ups. I will say, you probably don't want to make this move in a rebuilding roster, of course. But if you're a contending team and you can go get Lamar Jackson, helps you win right now, it's not like you take a massive hit with value in the long haul. I think you probably go for it. Now, Tyler coming out with our next question. Long-time lurker here. Much love, my guy. Appreciate all the time you put in. Currently 7-2, but we have a tough matchup. Well, let me hook you up with a free start sit question. That way, next time you send something my way, it doesn't cost you anything, my guy. Quarterback, here we are going to go ahead, and we're probably going to take Russ. Lawrence, 5.5-point dog in his game. If you actually have the Bears as like 7-point favorites. But with Russ, this is probably a situation in which he's going to be forced to throw the ball, of course. You have a game going up against Washington where Washington, one of the best offenses in the league. Going over to running back, Achane, locked and loaded starter every single week. Wide receiver, Jamar Chase. Garrett Wilson, locked and loaded starters every week. Tight end, I go with Mike Gesicki this week now that you have no Higgins. Down in the flex, we go with Jonathan Taylor. And for our last flex spot, you just have a nutso team here. I think we probably go Tracy if we get confirmation that Devonta Smith is 100%. He just missed practice today with the hamstring for precautionary reasons, blah, 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 blah. Then maybe you could pivot over to Smith. But if Smith and Brian Thomas Jr. are banged up a bit here, Tracy has a guaranteed workload in a phenomenal matchup against Carolina. It's not necessarily a spot in which you have to go through and take one of the receivers. Let's move this over to our next question coming out from Blank. This is Walker, A.J. Brown, Evan Ingram versus CMC, Zay Flowers, David Njoku. Walker to CMC, lateral move up to you. A.J. Brown to Flowers, massive downgrade. Ingram to Njoku, downgrade. I'm going to go with the Kenneth Walker side. Obviously, if you were to tell me, hey, Mason, just a heads up, I'm from the future. Christian McCaffrey is prime Christian McCaffrey here. You have literally nothing to worry about. Then at that point, it could be a very different situation. Then at that point, of course, you can go through and you can make the argument, oh, okay, well, CMC is the best asset in this deal. CMC has the highest ceiling in this trade. But Walker's a locked and loaded RB1. A.J. Brown's a locked and loaded wide receiver 1. I feel like you're taking on a lot of risk with this that you just don't necessarily have to. So for me, I'd personally probably just hold on to the Walker and A.J. Brown side. Now, Jake coming out with the question says, could also just do Tracy and Downs for Hall. What are your thoughts? I definitely like the first. I like the Tracy and Downs for Hall more. I don't fault you at all for going with. I would probably take Breece and Waddle here as well. But if we can keep Devonta Smith and just go through and trade Tyrone Tracy and Josh Downs and get to Breece Hall in a league in which you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, it's a no-brainer, and we'd love to do it, my friend. Now, Chicken Tendies, happy to see us, has traded DK for Dobbins, but don't trust Connor rest of season. Connor does have the best fantasy football playoff schedule of any running back in the NFL. So I don't think you need to sell Connor. But, I mean, this is a very fair price point. If you are pivoting off to Achane, I'm not going to fault you for this whatsoever. Like, you can definitely go ahead and take Achane here. Now, Nico P coming out with our next question says, this week determines if we get to the playoffs. Quarterback, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take Mahomes. Wide receiver, we are going to roll with, this is a little bit tougher. Hopkins, Flowers, both exciting options. I have Hopkins ranked wide receiver 18, Flowers ranked wide receiver 19 this week. My hesitation with Hopkins is it's a tough matchup. My hesitation with Flowers is it's a rush first offense where you could potentially see Deontay expand his role just a bit, not a ton, but a little bit. Can y'all please spam the chat? Who would you rather go with? Would you rather have Hopkins or Flowers inside your starting lineup? Are you going to go Hopkins or Flowers? Please spam the chat. We got Hopkins, Flowers, Hopkins, Flowers, Hopkins, Flowers, Hopkins, Flowers. Does look like maybe a handful of people are more so in on Hopkins than they are Flowers. It does seem really close. Like I said, I have Hopkins ranked 18. I have Flowers ranked 19. So I have Hopkins slightly ahead of Flowers myself. Going down to tight ends, I will go with Evan Ingram over Dallas Goedert. And I guess we're going to play Flowers at both the flex. So I lied to you. You know what we're going to do instead is we're going to go ahead. We're going to put Flowers in there at wide receiver since he plays on Thursday. And we'll move Hopkins down to the flex spot just in case something happens. So we did all of that just to start both guys. Okay. Now, Cash Flow Dom coming out. This is St. Brown and Connor versus Taylor and Debo. So St. Brown to Taylor, up to you with what your team needs. Connor to Debo, up to you with what your team needs. This is a perfect example of a deal that is just a personal preference and up to you. I probably go with Connor and St. Brown knowing the playoff schedules here, but I wouldn't fault you whatsoever for going with Taylor and Debo. I just think it's up to whatever you want, to be honest. Okay. Now, let me go ahead and refresh this to get some more of these questions in. Our next question coming out from Ling Tongda, I believe. I appreciate you. I'm going to be excited to check this out. Said, I made a trade this week. Henry Smith Pacheco for CMC Najee Harrison. Taking on a lot of risk when we're doing that. I think it's a bad trade now. How can I improve the team still? Someone offered me Kupp Debo for Najee Dell. You go get Kupp Debo. That saves the team. That makes the trade worthwhile. I definitely would have just kept Derrick Henry, but if you told me that you were able to flip Najee for this kind of upgrade right away, then you know what? All in all, good move. And yes, go get Deebo Samuel. Actually, no. Is this only Kupp or Deebo? Go get Kupp. Go sell Najee and Dell and get Kupp. It's a 12-team, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league. We are the Beijing Bears here. We are currently 3rd in the league analyzer. We are sitting at 5-4. And we actually maybe need the running back depth with Najee, which freaking sucks. Looking at what we have at quarterback, we are rolling with Kyler Murray. So obviously, super excited here to have Kyler. You're starting him most weeks, given the rushing upside. He's given us some dud weeks so far this season, but still not changing much with our expectations going into the future. Looking at Stafford, I'm completely fine if you wanted to roster Stafford because obviously Kyler is on bye next week. Now, going over to what we have with the running back room, we are presumably sitting here with 2 RB1s. We have the combo of Achane and McCaffrey. Super exciting pieces to work with. Najee is a depth play. If we were to sell Najee, our running back depth would be a little bit compromised. What we would want to do in that case is we would for sure want to be picking up running back depth pieces off the waiver wire, trying to see if we can find somebody that potentially gives us some upside here if their situation were to change. So what those moves would look like is I would want to cut Mike Williams. I would probably want to cut Justice Hill as well. Because realistically speaking, it's a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league. How is Mike Williams hitting your starting lineup? He probably never does. Maybe as a random week in Pittsburgh where you get 2 receiving touchdowns and he drops 25 points. But for you to be able to predict that and then put him into your starting lineup over the other names that we have in our team, probably very, very tough to do. So for me, I would cut Mike. I would instead pick up Tank Bigsby. I would also cut Justice Hill and pick up probably Braylon Allen this week, maybe after the bye week, then pivot over to Zach Charbonnet. Because if we just think through the range of outcomes here, say you were to get an injury to Derrick Henry, now that Keaton Mitchell's back in, could you go through and could you start Justice Hill? Probably not. Justice Hill's probably in the same role that he was before. Maybe he sees a few more touches. So I would cut Hill. I would go pick up Braylon Allen. I would cut Mike Williams. I'd go pick up Tank Bigsby. Because if you were to see an injury to Travis Etienne, then at that point, we know for sure that yes, Tank Bigsby is a must-start play. If you were to see an injury to Braylon Allen, then we know at that point, an injury to Breece Hall, we know Braylon Allen's a must-start option. Going over to wide receiver, we're loaded. We have a ton of wide receiver depth. We have the production at the top end as well. We have St. Brown, Harrison, Olave, Dell, Ridley, Ricky Pearsall. Really nothing to discuss here at wide receiver other than we're strong enough where it's like Mike Williams can't really make a difference for us on our roster. And then when we have Evan Ingram here, Evan Ingram is a must-start tight end every single week going into the future. Knowing that you have no Kirk, so the expanded targets should be there in Jacksonville. So ultimately, I like the team. I just think what we need to be doing is we need to be prioritizing running back depth. The way that we do that is by making those simple waiver wire pivots. And also because of the limited running back depth, I don't know if we go ahead and we immediately sell Najee to go get that upgrade at wide receiver. Actually, F it. I'm going to do it anyway. It's just too good value to pass up on. It's a league where you're going to start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, and you have those running backs we can pick up off the waiver wire. But I really appreciate you, and I really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. Again, thank you so much, of course, for taking advantage of that free team review. Now, moving this over to Brazy with our next question. Here, wide receiver. We are going to go ahead and we're going to start Puka with very little hesitation. We're going to go McBride over Hawkinson with very little hesitation. Chase Brown is just somebody that you have to get in. Obviously, he plays on Thursdays, so we'll throw him in at running back, move Achane down to the flex. And we're going to go with London in the other flex spot. And if London isn't good to go, then you pivot over to Brian Thomas Jr. But London did did practice on Wednesday, so I have faith. Now, Declan WWWW coming out with our next question. So, hey, Mason, we have a really small league with some friends, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, but feel like I've created the perfect squad almost. I know it might be hard for you to give me advice because of the size of my league, but everything's appreciated. Your content is great. Keep it up. Thank you so much, my guy. Clearly, you watch a lot of it because you already know that we're going to have an issue here. Because 1, yes, it is a league in which you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. And 2, more importantly, it's an 8-team league, right? So when we're looking at a league like this, the waiver wire options are going to be phenomenal. With that in mind, it will be very difficult for us to go through and make many pivots. Looking at our roster, we are number 1 in the league analyzer. We have Burrow, Kyler. I will say, with us having this strong of a roster in a league in which you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, if you ever had the ability to go through and potentially move off of like Amari Cooper and Joe Burrow and go and make a deal in which you're able to potentially get a true elite level quarterback, get one of the top 4 names, I think that would make a ton of sense. Here at running back, obviously, we're loaded. We have Achane, Henry, Gibbs. 3 guys we're able to start every single week. It's not like anybody's ever interested in Dowdle, so, I'm not going to tell you to trade him in this kind of league. Wide receiver, we have St. Brown, Puka, Drake, London. Amari Cooper, DJ Moore, Jacoby Myers. Some who were sitting here presumably with multiple wide receiver 1s at the very top. And especially when we have the elite 3rd RB here, like having the other wide receiver depth piece just simply doesn't really matter because we're going to be throwing a running back into the flex anyway. One thing that you could look to do with this team, just thinking through this logically, is this is a team in which obviously our number 1 priority is the fantasy football playoffs. We have such a monstrous squad in which it's probably impossible for us to ever go through and start somebody like Amari Cooper, where it could make a lot of sense for you to just go ahead and pivot off of like Amari and go get Mike Evans. Could make a lot of sense for us to pivot off of like Rico Dowdle and go get Isaiah Pacheco and sacrifice the short-term production that we don't need anyway for some longer-term upside with a player that potentially has a higher ceiling. I think that's the main play I'd be looking to make outside of going through and selling a wide receiver depth piece with a quarterback and a 2-for-1 deal to go get that just absolute stud, somebody on the Mount Rushmore. But I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this, my guy. And again, thank you so much for being a member of the flock. Thank you for taking advantage of that free team review. I'm sorry we didn't have much else to say with this team, but obviously you're already crushing it. In these league settings, it's tough to make too many plays. Now, HRD Ball says, start Mooney or Tyreek. We are for sure going Tyreek Hill, even if Drake London doesn't play. Now, I completely understand that, yes, Tyreek has been disappointing all season. We can excuse some of the disappointing weeks that we had earlier in the year based off the fact that you had no Tua. Over the past 2 weeks, Tyreek's also been disappointing even with Tua back in. But still, you have the 2-week sample of him being disappointing with Tua versus the years and years and years of examples that we have of Tyreek Hill being an absolute elite league-winning player. So the last thing I'm doing is ignoring everything that we've ever had just because of a 2-week stretch to play Tyreek. Now, Eric Freeman, appreciate you, says 14-team league, 2-player keeper. I got an offer of Tyreek for my second-round pick next season. Is it worth it for a second, or is my team good enough for the playoffs? Thanks, dude. Thank you. So going through and checking out the squad that we have, it's a 14-team league where we have Breece, Chase Brown, Aaron Jones. So presumably we have 3 RB1s for a 14-team league. We have St. Brown, Brian Thomas, T. Higgins. It's a league in which you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. So, I mean, our team's, of course, a playoff team. Our team should be probably favored to win this league. The question is, like, do you need Tyreek Hill or not? I think Tyreek's definitely an upgrade in your flex spot over what you're currently looking at or at your wide receiver 2 slot. But still, at the same time, you may not necessarily need to make this deal. So it really just comes down to what your priority is. If the owner with Tyreek is looking to rebuild, if they're punting off for next season, it can't hurt to just get back to him and go, hell, I'll give you a third. Because when we were looking at picks, especially in a 14-team league, the drop-off is pretty dramatic as you go through the early rounds. Because in a 14-team league, if you think about the difference between like a 10-teamer and a 14-teamer in round 3, round 3, the start of the round's at pick 21 in a 10-team league. Whereas the start of the round is at pick 29 in a 14-team format. Obviously, Tyreek's much better than whatever player will be at 29. And potentially it could be much later than that, of course. So, I mean, I think your team's definitely a playoff team. I think your team definitely is probably the favorite to win it. The question is, like, do you really need Tyreek? But let me hook you up with another free trade question just in case you have something else that you wanted to send over my way. If you wanted to push in to win right now, I'm not going to fault you at all for going Tyreek Hill there. Now, Arnick BB coming out again says 14-team Happy BR Superflex. Was planning on rebuilding this year, but have lucked into it 6-3 with the second most points for and the third most max points for. Should I go all in on for Lamar with that deal that we looked at earlier, which honestly I think, yes, is a very good price point because we are that contending team, and try to get a wide receiver 1 with my 2025 first and second? We won the championship 2 years ago and happy to take a year off after pushing this year and then rebuilding in 2027. So right now we are gym class Herbos. We are currently the 13th team in the league analyzer, which obviously is taking into account what we have with long-term value. This is a dynasty league, so we're pulling in the dynasty rankings. So this is a team that the long-term value is not there. Like if you go, you have to make this play to go all in and win right now. Yes, you do. I'm going to be completely honest with you. You push in to win right now with this Justin Herbert trade. We're still probably a quarterback. Actually, thank God we have Jameis. Jameis actually makes a big difference here. But if we make that move where we get Lamar, you know what I would do is I would really try to hold on to Tracy if we could. With this being a 14-team format, obviously the depth is going to matter a little bit more. Beyond the top 2 names that we have with Saquon and Henry, if you were to have that injury to either player, it would put us in a very compromising spot if you were to have gone through and traded away Tyron Tracy. So for me personally, I actually probably see if we can hold on to Tracy in that deal And yeah, going through and trading away the future first, I would trade away your 2025 first. You have to hold on to your 2026 first. But if you can trade away your 2025 first and go pick up an additional wide receiver, because I'm really surprised we're sitting at 6-3 with this wide receiver room currently. I mean, not even to mention the DK Metcalf injury. The wide receiver depth is extremely limited. Where beyond that, we are rolling with Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, Khalil Shakir, Yoshi Vosh, Juwan Jennings. But I mean, this is a team that should be the heavy favorite in a 14-team league to win this league this year. But the downfall with this is if you try to project this out in the long term, it is going to be a garbage roster in 2025. It is going to be a garbage roster in 2026. Like, it is going to be a very, very tough spot. Where the second after this season ends, the second that this season concludes, we'll need to pivot over to a rebuild. Like, I don't think you're rebuilding in 2027. I think you're rebuilding in 2025. So you need to hold on to your 2026 first for sure. I think going through and making that play to get the wide receiver upgrade makes a ton of sense. But I mean, realistically, if we think about the assets that will be worth less on this team this offseason than they are right now, once we make the Lamar Jackson trade, Lamar, then Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, DK Metcalf, whatever wide receiver we potentially trade for on top of Metcalf. Like, I think you would be in a situation in which you need to just lock up the 101 in 2026 with our 2026 first or 2026 second. So I would look to hold on to our 2026 second as well, because the second that this season concludes, it'd be very tough imagining you going through and trying to win with Saquon Henry another year older and with not that much depth whatsoever, where if you were to see an injury, then you are just completely compromised. So yes, I know we've said the same thing 1,000 times. I'm just looking at this team, seeing if there's any other way out of it. I think you go out there, you make the trade for Lamar, you push. Oh, now I'm an idiot. No, never mind. Let me rephrase this. You make the trade for Lamar by trying to counter with, we'll give you Herbert, Tracy, and my 2025 first. You can't trade them your 2026 first. I'm sorry, I got confused with the picks that we were trading for a second. Your team's not good enough to assume that we are a strong contender in 2025. You're going to have so many players losing it on value. On paper, if everybody stayed healthy and nobody fell off, then yeah, you'd be great. But at the same time, you're just taking on so much risk there. So you can't sell your 2026 picks. You need to hold on to them. If you can make that deal with Lamar by going through and selling your 2025 first and Herbert, holding on to Tracy, we do it. But if not, if you wanted to push in, the other deal is to get, say, the 2025 first traded for some veteran options. But let me hook you up with a free trade question and a free start set question just in case you have any follow-ups that you want with this team. But the issue with trading away your 2026 first is your team is going to be in a world of pain come this offseason. But let's move this over to a next trade coming up from Skitty. This is depth and flex would be awful. We're going from Gibbs to Henry, clear upgrade. Hurts to Hopkins, clear downgrade. Gibbs already through the bye. Henry's not. Cousins not much more than a streaming option here. The depth, yeah, this is a league where depth actually does matter a considerable amount. Looking at the garbage players that are on our roster at the very bottom end. Can y'all spam the chat? What side would y'all rather have? It's a league where depth matters. Would y'all rather have Jalen Hurts and Jahmyr Gibbs or Derrick Henry, DeAndre Hopkins, and Kirk Cousins? I'm assuming most people in a league where the depth matters, we're going to go with Derrick Henry and Hopkins. We got 1 vote for Hurts, 2 votes for Hurts, 1 vote for Cousins. Yaboyski says, oh, I'm the team getting Hurts. Okay, so it's just flips. Looking at it in that instance, sorry. Wide receiver afterwards, we'd have Waddle, Jefferson, Chase. Running back, we'd have Breece, Gibbs. And we'd have Jalen Hurts at quarterback. So looking at your team where you have, I think Waddle in your format's probably startable, to be honest. But when we have Jefferson, when we have Chase, yeah, you can afford to go make this trade. You can afford to get the elite quarterback. Let's go get Jalen Hurts and Jahmyr Gibbs here. Especially as you can use the tiebreaker with Gibbs through his bye and Derrick Henry isn't. Now, league winner coming out with our next question here. This is a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex format, 5-4, and we like Breece's playoff schedule. This is not even remotely close, regardless of what your format is, regardless of who has a good playoff schedule, who has a bad playoff schedule. Pivoting from Jefferson to CMC and Breece is a no-brainer here. Yes, please. Let's go ahead and let's make this move. Now, Rich Pedro says 5-4. We need a few wins before the weeks 12 and 14 bye. Running back, Mixon and Chase, very easy plays. Wide receiver, Chase again here. We're all in on Thursday night. We go Zay Flowers, and then down in the flex spot, we have no Dobbs. I'm probably going to go ahead and I'm probably going to take Addison. Don't love it. Obviously, it's not like Addison's had consistent volume all season. The volume hasn't been great. But you can say the same thing about Jameson. Or Jameson before the suspension was out here averaging, I want to say like 2.5, slightly under 3 targets a game. Now, Micro coming out with the start set questions is currently 4-5, feeling good rest of season. Any thoughts? Quarterback, we're going to go Kyler. Wide receiver, we go AJ Brown, Tyreek. Tight end, we have, we probably go McBride, but K-Dot has so much value that you could even consider flexing him. But you're just so good with this team. You got to go Breece in one flex spot, Hopkins in the other. And if you could sell Otten in like Hopkins and go get an absurd wide receiver, we would look to do that. Now, Jay Larario coming out with our next question. Here at running back, we go with Breece over Dobbins and Montgomery. Wide receiver, we're going to go ahead. We're going to take Puka. Going over to tight end, you go Bowers, and then down in the flex, full BBR format. If London plays, we're going to go Drake London. If he doesn't, we pivot over to David Montgomery, but it seems like London should almost be good to go with no hesitation with him practicing today. Now, Rich Pedro says 5-4, need a win and another team to lose to grab the number 1 slot. Well, here looking at our squad, we have Kyron and Derrick Henry. So yeah, no mystery on how we are potentially the number 1 team. And crap, Bowers is on bye. Thank you for everybody reminding me. With Bowers on bye, we go Ferguson over Hawkinson. I apologize. Yeah, go Ferguson over Hawk. But with Rich Pedro, we are going to go ahead. We're going to take Kyron Williams here, running back 2. Wide receivers, we'll go with Flowers and Pickens. Tight end, we're going to go with Kittle. And then down there in the flex, with Tillman on bye, sadly, we are going to be stuck with Waddle. Obviously, Waddle's been a bum, but to be fair to Jalen Waddle, it is a much better matchup that you have this week going up against the Rams, as opposed to what you had last week going up against the Bills. Now, let's go ahead and let's refresh this. Okay. Now, this is another free team review coming out from Darian. Says, been rough with Etienne not playing well. Don't know if this is included, but Ingram or Gesicki with no Higgins. I would go ahead. I would take Evan Ingram still. With Gesicki, I definitely agree. I think that he is exciting in this game against Baltimore. It's an environment in which we can clearly expect that we are going to have a considerable amount of pass attempts and dropbacks for Joe Burrow, while at the same time, you have no Higgins. Eric All does tear the ACL. So Gesicki is exciting this week, and I wouldn't fault you for going with them, especially if you just wanted to have something to root for on Thursday night. Now, looking at this, question is it ETN? Haven't seen that team name before. I'll give you points for creativity. Currently, it's a very well-balanced league. Seems like everybody probably really knows what they're doing looking at the power rankings of it. Looking at the league analyzer as well, the waiver wire options aren't super strong. There are a couple of these players down here off waivers that are an injury away from making a pretty big difference, such as Khalil Herbert and Braylon Allen. But anyway, we are streaming quarterback. It's a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex format. So 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league. Here it's a spot in which I'd probably rather have an elite quarterback if possible. The issue is I don't necessarily know if we have the depth to give up to be able to make that happen. Going over to what we have at running back, we're rolling with Bijan, locked and loaded RB1 every single week. We have Tracy as well. Looks like he is just the guaranteed starter here in New York. Most weeks, obviously, not super excited about Tracy. Most weeks we're not super excited about the Giants offense. This week's going to be a different situation in which you have a phenomenal matchup against Carolina. We have Bucky, ETN, kind of these pseudo committee handcuff type plays where if you were desperate enough, you could probably get them into your starting lineup, but more likely than not, you are just holding on to them. If you were to see the injury to Rachaad White, then all of a sudden, Bucky Irving becomes very appealing. If you were to see an injury to Tank Bigsby, then Travis Etienne becomes very appealing. Wide receiver, we have the elite option with Tyreek. We have Reed, Smith, Hopkins, Rome. It is a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, so it's a very well-balanced team. I don't know realistically what you could look to do here. I mean, maybe trading Hopkins if you can get an elite quarterback in return. If you could send Hopkins in May and somehow convince somebody, or even any of the wide receiver 2s, whether it's Reed, Smith, Hopkins, if you could send one of them and convince a team with the Mount Rushmore quarterback, whether that's Lamar, Hurts, Daniels, Allen, if you could get one of those options in return, 100% we would look to do so. But again, it is much easier said than done. So I think it's a very well-balanced team for the format. I go Ingram over Gesicki this week, even though I acknowledge, yep, great spot for Gesicki, of course. But I just think it's also a very good spot for Evan Ingram, that is. But I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way here with this. And thank you so much again for taking advantage of that free team review. Now, Van Glider's always happy to see us. Says, who to play at wide receiver 2 in the flex? Thank you, Hook 'em. Hook 'em, my friend. I'm going over to wide receiver. We are going to go ahead and most likely get in Brian Thomas Jr. I know it was disappointing this past week, but assuming that he is healthy and good to go. I mean, last week you did end up seeing him actually play a career high amount of snaps and routes. And then down there in the flex, you go with Chase Brown. But of course, since Brown plays on a Thursday night, you want to put Chase Brown in there at running back and move James Cook down to the flex just in case anything happens. But phenomenal team. And if Thomas doesn't play, then Darnell Mooney would be our pivot at wide receiver. Now, Crimp coming out with our next question. Says, Mason, I'm stacked at running back. Is this a good move now? This is a 10-team league where got a couple. Yeah, we have Dobbins, Mixon, Chase Brown, wide receiver. We actually could use some help. So I don't mind a deal like this at all. Just in my mind, I would much prefer trading the running back that has the shelf life. I would rather trade Najee and Kareem Hunt over to Deebo Samuel if we could do that. I definitely like the idea, though, with how much running back depth that you have to go through, and you can specifically afford to give up one of your running backs to go get that wide receiver upgrade. Now, Jay Allison coming out with our next question. This is Lamb versus Brian Thomas and Terry McLaurin. We actually answered this earlier in the live stream. If I was a team that was pretty much guaranteed a trip to the fantasy football playoffs, I probably want CeeDee Lamb. However, if you're needing to win right now to make sure you get to the playoffs, then obviously it is a different story in which I think you could go ahead and you could just take the Brian Thomas, Terry McLaurin side. So it is really going to be up to you on that front. I think it's honestly pretty tough. Now, Reed coming out with our next question. Here, this is Rodgers, Mahomes, Jennings, Neighbors, Rome versus Baker and Chase. Neighbors to Chase, clear upgrade. Rodgers, Mahomes to Baker, up to you. Who cares? We're paying Jennings and Rome. You're paying a bunch of crap to go get Jamar Chase. Go get Chase here. Yeah, this is like a bunch of noise, a bunch of nonsense. Really, by far and away, the most important piece of this is Malik Neighbors is being traded for Jamar Chase, which obviously is an upgrade based off the respective offenses that they are in. Okay, so let's move this over to our next question. This is coming out from Giuk. It says, my running backs are HN, Montgomery, Najee, Hunt, and Bigsby. No brainer. Let's go get Breece Hall here. Like, I almost don't even like putting players like Breece Hall into buy low videos, because I know in some of your leagues, there's just no way that you could ever get Breece Hall at this price points. But this is why I'm always tempted to go through and say, like, hey, I know in other leagues, some of y'all would be able to go get Breece at a discount, where this is still a running back that is seeing usage on all three downs. It's still a running back that has the usage as a receiver as well. So this is pretty damn easily Breece Hall, to be honest. Now, Christian coming out with our next question. Says, start set. Here, running back, we're going to fire up David Montgomery and Chase. David Montgomery, Chase Brown's must-start options. Wide receiver, Neighbors, St. Brown. Flex, you have such a strong team here. Probably Wilson and I guess Puka as well. I mean, it's a full PPR format. Obviously, you get the guaranteed touches with the running backs here, but both the receivers should have massive roles. Now, D-Mork says, currently 5-4, need a win this week. Who are we going with the quarterback in the flex? You go Brock Purdy, phenomenal matchup. Obviously, Purdy has demonstrated some rushing upside as well. Obviously, Kyron and Kamara both play. Chase, St. Brown both play. And if we're looking at a flex spot, it looks like George Pickens is the name, my friend. Looks like Pickens would be the guy. So let's move this over to our next question. This next one coming out from Official Rob. Says, might be panic selling. What do you think? Lamb to Tyreek, I think is an upgrade. Waddle to Hopkins, I think is an upgrade. I think you're paying Shakir to get it done. You're not panic selling. You're just acknowledging the fact that you have both CD Lamb as well as Dak Prescott injured. Dak with relatively no hope to be coming back anytime soon. So yeah, I think realistically you have to go ahead and if you can pivot from Lamb to Tyreek Hill, I think it's a no-brainer at this point. Now, Ross says, was aware of the Olave injury, wasn't worried because we have Chase, Nico, Puka, Devonta, Tillman, Olave. Brown to Bijan, clear upgrade. Brown looks phenomenal. Brown looks like he's for sure running back one right now until Khalil Herbert potentially comes in and takes 20 to 30% of this backfield. And even at that point, Brown will remain a must-start player every single week, regardless of the matchup. Pollard to Olave, if you're telling me you're a playoff team, I completely understand going through and making this move. Now, obviously, a team that needs wins right now, then obviously it's a lot tougher to make that argument. Now, P. Burnap says, don't have any depth at running back. Should we go for Breece? London to Breece, in my mind, clear upgrade. Ladd to Mooney, slight downgrade. If you have no depth at running back, yeah, 100%. This is a very fair price point to go get Breece Hall. Now, Manjo coming out says, I don't trust any of my other wide receivers on my flex unless you think otherwise. Maybe start Ferg or Taysom. Okay, so let's look at this. So, what, Keon, if he played, would be the best option? But Keon missed practice. I would still probably go Pittman over Ferg. Obviously, Ferg is set to just have a ridiculous amount of target volume. It should just be a really, really bad offense. Or right now, you do have sportsbooks projecting the Cowboys to be like a borderline bottom 5 offense this week. Pittman's been very bad, but I think there's more passing volume there in Indy. Hoodie Mo says 5-4 and have CMC, Hall, Pacheco. Wide receivers are Zay and Smitty. Laporta is almost a 0. Laporta is barely better than a streaming tight end. I don't even know if he is, to be honest. Chase Brown to Brian Thomas. I would probably rather have Brown at this point. Because the thing is, too, if you realistically think about this, Khalil Herbert's not going to have a role whatsoever, really. This week in particular. I think this is going to be a Thursday night game. Everybody and their mom watches. And if you wanted to sell Chase Brown after this week, I think you could maybe even get a better price point. Now, Stankonia coming out says, Dynasty Rebuild gave Laporta for Kraft and 2/3 and 2/4. I'm not going to fault you for it. I would probably rather have Laporta, but I mean, Kraft's been better this season. And if you're picking up additional assets that we could possibly play around with in the offseason. So I'm trying to think if there's... My thing with Laporta is obviously he's been horrendous this season, but I think that you could potentially see the possibility that we get the report, the hamstring injury he was dealing with coming into the season turns out it was a little bit more serious than it was led on. And maybe in 2025, we get some big time bounce back. So I don't know. I don't know if we love selling Laporta in Dynasty. Now, obviously, if you get the price point it was at before the season, then of course we would. Now, CAD Football coming out says waiver wire is very thin. What's the move here? Wide receiver, we have no Olave, we have no Tillman. I guess we're rolling with Leggett. I mean, if we are looking at Xavier Leggett, have no Adam Thielen at practice this week. So the expectation is that, Leggett's wide receiver 1. We have no Walker this week, of course. I think you actually may end up getting stuck playing freaking Jake Ferguson here in one of the flex spots. I think you go Ferg and Gabe Davis. And if Gabe Davis doesn't play, then I guess you have to pivot over to Braylon Allen, right? But with Davis, if he is good to go, you should see him run a ridiculous amount of routes with no Christian Kirk. Now, Pickles, always happy to see it. Here at running back, we are going to go ahead. We will jam in Aaron Jones. I think you're in a line for a massive Aaron Jones bounce back. K-Don, very easy. Top 5 tight end every single week. Going down to the flex plays, they're definitely both going to be running back. I think we go with Dobbins and Hunt. Tracy is very, very appealing here. Of course, given the fact that it is just such a good matchup that you have against the Carolina Panthers. But at the same time, I don't know. Dobbins and Hunt are just in much better offenses. Now, Zen coming out with our next question. Says, we lost Evans, Ayuk, and Olave. We need some help at wide receiver. So, Dobbs to Bigsby. Who really cares? You're selling a depth wide receiver, depth running back. I'd almost rather have Bigsby just in case ETN were to get injured again. Hunt to Jaden Reed. I'd probably rather have Reed rest of season if you're thinking about the implication of Pacheco coming back in later in the season. So, I think we go ahead. You make this pivot over to Jaden Reed. Typically, I'd say Reed's not necessarily someone we're looking to buy at the moment, but with that being said, it is a very fair price point. But I think that should be about it for this live stream. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for hanging out with us. Obviously, we'll be live before the game tomorrow, answering as many questions as we possibly can. I really hope I get to see you then. And if I don't, I'm wishing you the best of luck. Should be a phenomenal game regardless. But much love, and thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight.